Okay, we are live. We are live. We are live. That's good. All right. Let's just see. Chat's going to be over there. All right. Over here. Good. Where I lose it? Here's the chat. Okay, so we are live. We're doing a live session. All right. I think this is actually working. Perfect. Wow, it's amazing. Let me just double check my YouTube. Yeah, there we go. That's it. It's working. Live on both. Okay, fantastic. All right. We got things going here. Okay. I'll just make sure that on YouTube we're live here as well. All right, let's just see. All right, let's just see. Interesting. Okay. Fantastic. We did it. All right. So we are live. We are live and we are dual live. This is amazing. This is absolutely amazing. When technology works the way it should work, this is absolutely amazing. Okay, now the only question is going to be is how I can get people to join my lives. I guess people will pop up and they'll see if they want to. Let me see if I can do it on. Yeah. All right. Let me see what happens in my live studio. Not that I want to dual stream on two different apps. Just curious what's going to happen now, because I want to be able to do the. Okay. So now what's going on? Let's just see. Okay. Oh, top here we go. All right. So I get people coming in now. Okay. Well, the question is, all right, we'll figure that out later. All right. So now we're going to talk with. Okay, let's save that. All right. All right. Here we go. Okay, so I was continuing. This is the. Oh, here we go. What's the topic? Oh, fantastic! I got the text. How do I do this? I don't know. Okay. How do I respond? Don't know how to respond on YouTube. All right, so we're going to see if someone wants to live stream on. Okay, so where was I? I left off. Sorry. Okay, now let's get back on this. Okay, so Tisha B'Av, 9th day of Av, we talk about in the morning that this is the very, very difficult time of the year. Okay, so we go to the kinnis. Of course, those who already did the kinnis, go through the morning. If you already passed the morning, then you will. The custom is only really to say them through the morning. But the rest of the day, obviously, we could learn about our Jewish history. We can learn about what things that have been going on with us. So of course, so we could do that, and of course we could talk about the topics that are important to us. So I'm just going to use the kinnis as a way to just to continue talking about the day, because learning Torah is not allowed in the state. So just okay, all right. I'm just trying to figure out some. Oh, hello. So okay, so we got the red pill here. Okay, that's good. I'm glad everyone should have a point of view. Good. The funny thing is that what he said doesn't really. What you said doesn't say anything, because I see the Lord. I see the Messiah is the Lord. I don't know where you get that from. I don't know where you have any authority that would say that that is the case. But okay, all right. All right, so we have then one of the kinnis that goes through here is, I'm not sure, I don't think it was written by Elazar Kalir like most of them were, but we talk about a comparative nature of where we went out of Egypt, how great, amazing and things were, but we went out of Jerusalem, how bad things were. So it says over here, so a fire of elevation, so we have a fire of elevation burns within me. When I recall in my heart what happened, how great it was when I went out of Egypt. And then we say, but unfortunately there's lamentations. And that's what I remember when I went out of Jerusalem. Then Moses sang the song, goes Yashir, right? Not to be forgotten when he went forth from Egypt. But Yirmiyah, he had to lament dolefully. He had to give a dirge when we went out of Jerusalem. My house, the Mishkan, the base of Mikdash, the tabernacle was originally established. The cloud rested upon it when I went out of Egypt, but God's fury rested like a heavy cloud upon me when I went out of Jerusalem. The waves of the sea split and piled high, and I stood like a wall. I went out of Egypt, but the enemy drowned me and poured my head down. In other words, I was buried in tears when I left Jerusalem. Then we say the heavenly grain and the rock from which flowed water. So in other words, we got manna, and we got the quail, and we got water from God when I went out of Egypt. But what did I have? I had wormwood and bitterness and bitter waters when I went out of Jerusalem. From dawn to dusk, we encircled Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai, God's mountain, to hear his Torah when I went out of Egypt. But a call to morning by the rivers of Babylon when I went out of Jerusalem. And the appearance and the glory of the Lord, Hashem, was like a fire consuming me when I went out of Egypt. But abandoned for slaughter of the sharpened sword when I went out of Jerusalem. We had sacrifices and flour offerings and cake offerings and oil libations when I went out of Egypt. But God's treasure was taken like a sheep to slaughter when I went out of Jerusalem. Do you know that the Colosseum was actually funded by the money that was taken out of Jerusalem when Rome sacked Jerusalem. That's what funded the building of the great Colosseum. People admire the Colosseum. They come around to see it, and they take pictures, and it's a great tourist attraction. It's a wonderful, amazing, unbelievable sight. But yeah, it was funded by the temple treasures. Festivals and Shabbos and miracles and signs when I went out of Egypt. But we had fasting in the morning and pursuit of futility when I went out of Jerusalem. We had God's tent and our flags, and we all grouped 12 tribes as one when I went out of Egypt. But tents of the Ishmaelites and camps of the uncircumcised when I went forth from Jerusalem. We had the Jubilee and we had the sabbatical year, looking forward to the land when I went out of Egypt. But I was sold for posterity and torn apart and cut to pieces when I went forth from Jerusalem. The Ark of Testimony, the Ark of Kodesh, the Holy Ark, the Ark of Testimony on its cover, and the stones of remembrance, and the stones of the high priest. that were on his shoulders when I went forth from Egypt, but the stones from catapults and weapons that devour when I went forth from Jerusalem. The Levites and the sons of Aaron and the 70 elders we had when we went out of Egypt, but tyrants and tormentors and slave traders and buyers when I went forth from Jerusalem. Moses provided for us, and Aaron guided us when we went forth from Egypt. But Nebuchadnezzar and Hadrian, the emperor, when I went forth from Jerusalem, although the Vespasian is the one that sacked Jerusalem, the final blow was Hadrian when he quelled the rebellion in Beitar. We were arrayed for battle, and Hashem was with us. We went out of Jerusalem, we went out of Egypt, but he was distant from us, and indeed, he seemed not to be present when I went forth from Jerusalem. The ark concealed behind the curtain, and the table with the bread and arrangement when I went forth from Egypt. But fury poured upon me and hovered over me when I went forth from Jerusalem. Burnt offerings and sacrifices, and the pleasing fire offerings, the pleasing to God, when I went forth from Egypt. But I was stabbed with the sword with precious children of Zion when I went forth from Jerusalem. Glorious turbans and designated for the priest's honor when I went forth from Egypt. But a whistle called and trumpet blasts, fearsome cries and shuddering when I went forth from Jerusalem. The high priest's golden plate, the monarchy and sovereignty when I went forth from Egypt. But the tiara was thrown down, and the divine help had vanished when I went forth from Jerusalem. Sanctity and prophecy and the glory of Hashem was manifest when I went forth from Egypt. But abomination and filth and impure spirit when I went forth from Jerusalem. Joyous song and salvation and the triumphant trumpet blasts when I went forth from Egypt. But infants wailing and mortally wounded moaning when I went forth from Jerusalem. Again, we're doing Kinna Lamed Aleph. This is 31, Dirge 31 of the Tisha B'Av service. Joyous songs and salvation and the triumphant trumpet blast when I went forth from Egypt. But the infants wailing and mortally wounded groaning when I went from Jerusalem. The tabernacle's table and the menorah, burnt offering and incense when I went forth from Egypt. But idol and abomination, grave images and pagan steels when I went forth from Jerusalem. And then it ends off. This Kinna, this dirge ends off with a happy note. And it says, Torah and testimony and the cherished vessels when I went forth from Egypt, gladness and joy and anguish and sighing will flee when I return to Jerusalem. We'll return to Jerusalem with God's help. So as we sit on the floor today, and we got up because it's at midday, but we continue to mourn the rest of the day. The temple, this is the one day a year we mourn our temple from 2,000 years ago. And we look forward to when God is going to bring us back to the land in his glory and in the proper way. So we're reading 31, Kinna 31, and I'll sing it in the Hebrew. I just did it in the English. Now we're going to sing it in the Hebrew. Eish tu kadbekir bi bahaloi si ali bi betseisi mi mitzrayim kini ma'ira lamawa naskira betseisi mirushalayim oz yasher moishe shir layinosha betseisi mi mitzrayim v'konen yirmiya v'naha nihiya betseisi mirushalayim Beisi hiskonan v'shachana onan b'tseisi mi Mitzrayim v'chamas el shokno olai kaonono b'tseisi mirushalayim galayam ramu v'chachoma kramu b'tseisi mi Mitzrayim Zidunim shefatu v'yalroi shayitatafu b'tseisi mirushalayim Digan Shemayim Mitzoriyos Ovumayim B'tseisi Mi Mitzrayim Lano umeroirim umayim umerorim b'tzeisim Yerushalayim Hashkim bahar eibs voice harchoid b'tzeisim mitzrayim Korei alevel al naharos babel b'tzeisim Yerushalayim. We continue. This is Lamed Al. This is 31 of the dirges for Tisha B'Av. Although after midday people stop saying it, but I figured I'll continue because what else are we going to learn on Tisha B'Av together? Maybe we'll learn our history and everything else, but we'll go through them. I did it in English, and now I'm singing it in the traditional song that's been sung hundreds of years as we wait for the temple to be rebuilt, and I'll sing it in that tune, and we continue in the Hebrew. Umarei kvoid Hashem, kishem oicheles lafonoi b'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim, v'cherev litusha, v'tevech nitusha, v'teisi Yerushalayim. And again, it's basically contrasting between going out of Egypt and going out of Jerusalem. Going out of Egypt when we had the great redemption, going out of Jerusalem when we had the great exile. Zevachum nucha v'shemen hamishcha Tzeisi mi Mitzrayim, segulas elakucha, kitzoy letivcha, b'tzeisi Yerushalayim, chagim v'shabbos, soisomoy pisim ve'osos, b'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim, tainis v'evel, v'rodev ha'evel, b'tzeisi Yerushalayim, tuvu. Tovu ahalim la'arvada degalim b'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim v'ahale Yishmaelim u'machanos arelim b'tzeisi Yerushalayim yoshevu shmita ve'eret shoketa b'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim Machor latzim usus v'charus v'chasus b'tzeisi Yerushalayim Kapores va'aron va'avnei zicharon b'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim v'yavnei haka'ala chlei habala b'tzeisi Yerushalayim leviyim v'haronim v'shivim zekenim b'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim Nogashim umonim umocharim v'konim b'tzeisi Yerushalayim. Again, those who are joining us, this is the dirges for the 9th of Av, the one day a year. We recall all our hardships in the exile, obviously of the destruction of the temple and the hope that the temple will be rebuilt. Lamed Aleph 31, and this is a contrast between us leaving Egypt in redemption and leaving Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, in destruction and exile, and we continue. Moshe Yireinu va'aron yankeinu b'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim Nebuchadnezzar v'Andronos Kesar. That's Hadrius, but I guess it's in the Hebrew version. Andronius Kesar b'tzeisi Yerushalayim Naroich mechama v'adoi noishama b'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim Orochak mimenu v'heinei eineinu b'tzeisi Yerushalayim Sisrei paroiches v'sidrei mareches b'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim Chema neseches v'alai soisches b'tzeisi Yerushalayim Ola uzvachim v'ishei nechochim b'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim B'cherev midukorim b'nei Tzion hayakorim b'tzeisi Yerushalayim Parei megavos nichvos b'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim Sherikos utruos v'kolos uzros b'tzeisi Yerushalayim Sin Hazav Hamshel v'Rahab b'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim Hushlach Hadnezer v'Afas Ha'ezer b'tzeisi Yerushalayim. And then we're going to finish off the last few verses. Again, this is 31 of the dirges for Tisha B'Av, the one-day year where we mourn our temple and mourn all the tragedy that happened in our exile. And we sing it in the traditional way. It's been sung for hundreds of years. Kedusha u'nevuah v'yadai nira b'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim Nigala umayra v'ruach hatova b'tzeisi mirushalayim rina vishua v'chatzoy tzrois hatrua b'tzeisi mimitzrayim zakas oilolo v'nakas chololo b'tzeisi mirushalayim shulchanum nora v'cholel ketorah b'tzeisi mimitzrayim Elil v'soeva fesel matzeva v'tzeisi merushalayim. And the last one, we're going to have a little bit of hope. Torah utu dochlech hachem da b'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim sochain v'simcha v'nos yagoin v'anocho b'shuvi Yerushalayim Torah utu dochlech hamda b'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim sochain v'simcha v'nos yagoin v'anocho b'shuvi Yerushalayim. Speedily in our days, Torah and testimony, the cherished vessels, when we went forth from Egypt, gladness and joy and anguish and suffering will flee when I return to Jerusalem. People in the world are nuts. You know, people do. They go around and they look for something that they can vent their own suffering and anger on. Listen, life is not easy. We know all that. They're still living in their mother's basement, dirty t-shirts on, still have a girlfriend, still haven't found the one, or their wife hates them, their kids hate them more. So they go around and they hate on other people. That gives them a little bit of pleasure, but it doesn't give them a lot of pleasure. So they go seeking other people to hate on. Jealousy. They can't stand someone who has it all together. They can't stand someone who knows what's what, who understands. So they go ahead and hate on other people. The topic is kinnis with Rabbi Morty. That's the topic. Very, very plain. If you don't know what kinnis is, kinnis are dirges that we say on Tisha B'Av. One day a year, Jews have a year to mourn all their losses and suffering that happened throughout exile. And we continue to do so. There's an amazing story that, hey, Courtney, there's an amazing story. Napoleon did not know what a Jew was. He never met a Jew. Jews were expelled from France. But when he was conquering Europe and he went to Germany, he saw Jews. Happens to be, he rode through a town on this day, the 9th of Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the 5th month of the lunar calendar. And he comes across a synagogue and he wants to see. He's very curious. I ain't never met a Jew. I want to see what Jews do. So he comes into the synagogue and he sees all the Jews are on the floor. And they're saying these dirges. So he calls the Jews and he says, what's going on? So of course they stop. Napoleon walks in, you stop. They stop service and they see that, well, Herr Emperor, here you are. Well, what can we do for you? So he says, I want to know what a Jew is. I want to know what's going on. Why are you all sitting on the floor? I see there are perfectly good benches, perfectly good seats. Why are you sitting on the floor? So I tell him, one day a year, we mourn over our temple. And we mourn like we have other laws of mourning, like as if someone would mourn a parent or a sibling or a spouse or a child. There's rules of mourning, there's customs of mourning for Jews. So part of the custom is we sit on the floor and we don't greet people, we don't wash, we don't engage in relations, we don't engage in business, and we contemplate what we lost. One day a year, we have this holiday, this anniversary of the destruction of our two temples. So we set aside one day a year to sit on the floor in the morning and to mourn our temples. That's what we're doing. So Napoleon asked them, he says, how long ago was your temple destroyed? I didn't hear about this. Was it a year ago? Was it 5 years ago? Was it 100 years ago? They told him no. It was about 1,700 years ago at the time, 1800s, right? Around the year 1800, it was 1,700 years before our temple was destroyed. He says, 1,700 years? You're mourning for 1,700 years? You haven't seen the temple. Your father hasn't seen the temple. Your grandfather hasn't seen temple. No one who you could ever trace back to or think about, your great grandparents haven't seen the temple. You're talking about great ancestors, and you're still sitting here 1,700 years later, and you're mourning the temple. He said, I guarantee if you are mourning the temple still, you will see it rebuilt. Now, of course, he didn't mean those people specifically, but he couldn't fathom that a people could hold on to what they've lost, never have seen it in their life, just to know it by tradition, by knowledge, by learning. And the way we view it is that anything that happens in the world that is bad, whether it's the Jews or not the Jews, it is a side product. It is a side product that God is in exile, that God does not live in his house. Because when the end of days will come and God will live in his house, and there will be a temple where God is there will be peace in the world. There will be peace. The plows will be beaten down. The swords will beat down to plows. The lambs will sleep next to the lion. There will be countries that no longer need to be in war with each other. There will be peace. Now, humans will still be humans, but we'll know God, and we'll know where to find God. And though God will be for the whole world, the entire world. And, well, how do I figure 1,700 years? It's a very simple calculation. Temple destroyed around 70 AD. Then you minus that from the year 1800. What does your math get you? Anyway, so that's how we get the math. If you're asking for longer or shorter, so then maybe you missed the part where I was talking about Napoleon. They were talking about Napoleon. Napoleon was the year 1800. Right around the 1800, he came to Germany and he met a Jew for the first time. Yes, so there should be peace. One thing we miss in the temple service is the priests. The priests would bless the people, and every single day they would bless the people with peace. Yivracha Hashem v'yishmecha, Yar Hashem panav elecha v'chunecha, and then Yisa Hashem panav elecha. May God's countenance, his face, turn toward you. V'yasem lecha shalom, and place into you, to you, and within you, peace. This is what they bless the people with every single day. This is what we bless our children with every Friday night, and some do it also Saturday night. Every holiday, we bless our children with peace. All we want in the world is peace. And when God returns to his house, there'll be peace. There's several of these kinnis that were written, and this is going back to the Middle Ages and even past that, going back even to the 700s. And they use the word Zion. They didn't make up the word Zion. The word Zion is Zion. The word Zion, Zion, Zionist, Zioni did not come or invented in the 1800s. Zion refers to Jerusalem at large. Jerusalem was a city inside of Judea, inside of Eretz Yisrael, so the land of Israel. And Zion was the extended portion of the city. King David conquered this Jebusite city, and he made his capital there in Jerusalem. So Jerusalem was a Temple Mount, and Jerusalem was Ir David. Later on, the city was expanded west. And when it was expanded west, that portion, it was onto Har Zion. Har Zion is a mountain right next to the Temple Mount, to the west of it. And on Har Zion is where the rest of the city was built. And of course, the city was expanded. It eventually took up 7 hills. And that's how big the city was. Eventually, this is about the Second Temple era, the end of Second Temple era, after the Herodian dynasty. It took up basically 7 hills. It was a pretty big city for the time. It housed easily 40,000 residents comfortably. By the time of the destruction, it has 600,000 residents because people escaped there, running away from the Romans, but that's a different story. But it housed 40,000 residents, basically about 3.5 miles by 3.5 miles. It's a pretty big size city, if You had, 3.5 miles or 3.5 miles square. I think it was something like 200,000 hectares, whatever that is. It was a big city. And that was Zion. So Zion was the city at large. When you talk about Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, so in the Torah and the prophets and the writings, when it talks about Yerushalayim, it refers to that part where it has a Temple Mount and it has Ir David. When it refers to Zion, it refers to the people, because that's really where everyone lived. Everyone lived in the west, on Har Zion, and in the south a little bit of Har Zion. So that was Zion. So Zion was the name of the part where the people lived. The city was Jerusalem, but one part of the city was Jerusalem. The other part of the city was Zion. When foreigners would come to Eretz Israel and later to the land of Israel or the land of Judea, they wouldn't call it necessarily Judea, although the Romans called the people Judeans, and the Greeks called the people Judeans. They got it from the Greeks. The Greeks called people Judeans because they were from the tribe of Judah, mostly, not always, because of course you had a lot of Levi, which are the priests, and the Levites. Levi is a priest, and Levi is the Levites. And then you also had some from Ephraim that survived the first temple destruction, and you had Benjamin. So you did have from other tribes. But for the most part, it was supposed to be the kingdom of Judah, because David was the king from Judah, from Yehuda. So they called them Judeans. When people would visit and they would go to Jerusalem, they would visit Zion, the land of Zion. Now, Jerusalem was its capital, but the land in general was called Zion because that the people were Zion. So in the 1800s, when the teenagers and young men who left the shtetls for the first time and went to university, they broke out from the tradition of living in ghettos, and they decided to get educated, and they left their old habits behind. They left their rabbi, and they left their traditions, and they decided we could be Jews in the world also. We could assimilate. The first assimilation in the 18th century, late 1700s, early 1800s, when the assimilation happened. So a lot of Jews started becoming secular, started becoming intermarrying, and started assimilating. Now, some of the Jews would still be connected to their shtetls, to their little villages and towns. The poverty that pervaded the Jewish people in Ukraine, in Belarus, in Russia, on the Pale especially, but also parts of Poland. Even though there was no Poland back then, Poland was part of Russia, half Germany, which is why Germany wanted it back after World War I. But anyway, so when they were in the Polish people were constantly swallowed up by Russia and Germany. Then they had their own independence. Then again, they were swallowed up by Russia and Germany. Then again, had their own independence. It's a long history in Europe. People who are not from Europe have no clue what went on over there. Anyway, when those people from Poland, the Poland territories, from Prussia, the Prussian territories, from Germany, and from Ukraine and Belarus, and from Estonia, and from Lithuania, and from Holland. So a lot of them were poor farmers. They were designated. There were not a lot of trade that Jews were allowed to go into. Jews had to stay sort of in their own. They weren't allowed to be in mass for a long, long time, until basically the 1860s when there was enlightenment. But people started to escape the shtetl in the late 18th century, early 19th century. And as these Jews started becoming assimilated and started getting educated, they had ideas. We don't have to be inside here anymore. We could be free, because the truth is, it wasn't only Jews that wanted to be free. Feudalism was ending, and there was a renaissance in the world. So Jews and non-Jews alike had this renaissance, had this idea that maybe there's a better life, maybe there's a better government than a king who keeps us as peasants. Because Gentiles also were not very rich for the most part. Most of them who were not noble were poor. So there was a great renaissance among Jews and non-Jews. And that's exactly where Karl Marx fit in. People rank on Karl Marx, oh, communist. You have to understand, when you only had feudalism as a system of government, when you only had monarchy as a system of government, and the only one who could make it anywhere is a noble by basic bequeath of the king and permission of the crown, then the only way for people to be treated fairly was communism. Imagine a life where everything is shared. That was the answer to feudalism. Sure, it may not be the answer to other forms of democracy, and it may not be the answer to capitalism, and it may not be the answer to other forms of mitigated and moderate socialism. But when you lived in feudalism, when you lived under the thumb of a monarchy, communism was an amazing idea. That is the greatness of Karl Marx. In his time, he was right. Of course, he's wrong for now, and everyone in America who wants to go run there, they could go and visit the communist countries in Venezuela and South America and China and everywhere else and see how well the people fare under communism. And could ask the Russians who are still alive when they lived under communism in the USSR how wonderful communism was. But that's besides the point. In the time, it was the absolutely correct way to go. Amazing idea. Anyway, it was a renaissance. And these Jews had this idea. Instead of being persecuted in our little villages, maybe we could live somewhere where either we won't be persecuted or at least we can make it our own. And then there was a great wide-swept movement for Zionism. This guy Jabotinsky started it, and it spread. But it wasn't the first initial ideas of Zionism. Because again, like we said, Jerusalem is the Temple Mount and Ir David to its south. Zion is the name of the rest of the city. So Zion is the name of the people who come from that area. The Jews in that area are Zion. All in our prayers for 1950 plus years, we've been praying for to go back to Zion, to go back to Jerusalem, to go back to our land. So it's not a concept that was invented by any means in the 18th and 19th centuries. As a matter of fact, the Nachmanides was famous. He was a rabbi from Spain, and he went to go to live by Jerusalem, and he established a synagogue there in the 1200s. And from the 1200s, when he established a synagogue in the old city of Jerusalem, until 1948, there was a continuous quorum of Jewish men every single Shabbos, every single year, for all that time, from 1200s to 1948. There was always a quorum of men on Shabbos praying at that synagogue for all that time. Maimonides, who came before him, about 80 years before him, he also made his way to Egypt, and then he made his way to the land. Famously, there was many authors of the Talmud who were from Babylon, who made their way after the years and years after the destruction. They're talking about the 5th, 6th centuries, coming to go from Babylon and make their way to the land of Israel. And throughout, Europeans always had their eye on going there. In the 1900s, 1930s, when the Nazis came to power, so many German Jews left and went there because it was no longer safe or comfortable to be in Germany, so they went ahead and went there. So it was nothing new to go ahead and say that you wanted to go there. There was always first of all, Jews, even after the Temple era, never left. There was a second rebellion after 70. There was a second rebellion in 73 that culminated in destruction by Masada. There was another rebellion in 132. There was actually, before that, there was an uprising in like 117. There was further rebellion. A lot of Orthodox Jews would know this as the destruction of Rabbi Akiva's students. The Talmud hints at it in a way. It doesn't want to say specifically, so it says that they died because they didn't honor each other, which is the furthest thing from the truth, because Rabbi Akiva, no one had more honor for another human being than Rabbi Akiva did. The one who said, love your neighbor like yourself, that is the major tenet of the Torah. No one else had a more respect for his fellow than Rabbi Akiva did. So his students for sure had that respect. There's no way he could have 24,000 students, first of all, and second of all, have that many students and all of them forget the lesson of respecting one another. So the Talmud says it in a backwards way to try to hint that there was actually a massacre that happened right around the year 117. Then 132, there was a huge rebellion called the Bar Kokhba Rebellion out of Beitar. And people heralded Bar Kokhba as the Messiah. They thought he was going to be the Messiah. He was the one who's going to lead them. And the reason why they thought that is because it was 70 years after the previous exile. Right around 70 years. It was 60 some odd years. It was closing in on the 70 years. So they felt like the first exile was 70 years. So the second exile will be 70 years. We're going to get our temple back 70 years later. The Romans squashed that. Unfortunately, it did not go as planned. And there was so many bodies piled high that a person couldn't look over the piles. There was so much blood that ran through Beitar because the people that were killed by the Romans at the time, that the river, that all the plants and all the irrigation around were all irrigated with that blood for miles around. It was a terrible, terrible massacre to follow the terrible massacre that happened already when the temple was destroyed and Jerusalem was sacked. And still, there were Jews that were living in the area. They weren't allowed in Jerusalem because the Romans did not allow anyone to go to Jerusalem. Jerusalem was laid desolate for many years. But when Jerusalem was opened again to the public, the Jews established their quarter. They established their Jewish quarter. They went there and they established their quarter. They're the first ones back. Then the Armenians came. Later, the Arabs came. And then Christians came during the Crusades. So that's how you have the four quarters. That's how you have the Jewish quarter, the Muslim quarter, which was first the Arab quarter, then later it was a Muslim quarter, and then you have the Armenian quarter. The Armenians were also, I believe, a sect of Christianity that came. They were, I think, one of the original Christians, and they came back to Jerusalem to live, and they lived there in peace. But they lived there, but they were Jews. There were still Jews there, all predating the Arabs. And they were there, and then the Arabs came, and then of course there was the Arab conquest in the 7th century, and then in the 8th century they came to as far as Jerusalem. They went to North Africa, they went to Europe, they went to the rest of the Middle East, and they also came obviously to Israel, to the land, and they conquered Jerusalem, and of course, they slapped around the Jews while they were at it, and then the Christians came with the Crusades, and this is 1096, and the Christians fought back at the Crusades, First Crusade, the Second Crusade, Third Crusade, Fourth Crusade, Fifth Crusade, and of course, every time there was a Crusade, there was always pogroms on the way to Crusade. Let's kill Jews on the way. Let's massacre Jews on the way. Why not? Worms, Maims, massacred 14,000 were massacred in the First Crusade, unexpectedly, just completely without from French Crusaders passing through Germany on the way to the Holy Land. Why not kill Jews, pillage, plunder, rape, get what you need on the way? That's really where everything, terrible started with the Jews. The whole concept of the Jews killing Jesus started around that time. That was the first time that Pope Leo, or I believe, or I forgot exactly what, probably Pope Pius, came up with this idea, because then all the masses were illiterate. So tell them tell them it says what it says, and they'll believe you, because they were all illiterate anyway in the Middle Ages. And that's where it started. That's where the blood libel started. Sure, they made their Passover matzahs with the blood of Christian children, sure, because matzah ingredient, basically, it can't be leavened. So it has to really just be wheat and water, and it has to be stirred and baked within like a few minutes, because otherwise it'll turn to leaven. Sure, we have time to kill Christian children and put their blood into the matzah. I mean, it says 95 times in the Torah, don't eat blood, but sure. But people believe it, because people like to believe ill of one another. Human beings are programmed to believe ill of each other. If you are suffering in any way, and someone tells you that there is a scapegoat, and Jews invented the scapegoat, the Azazel, the goat that went to Azazel on the Yom Kippur service was the first scapegoat, literally, scapegoat. Anyway, people like to believe what they want to believe, and That's what they do. So they believed it. So that's where it started. It really started with the first pogroms. Before that, Jews left, obviously were exiled from Judea. 97,000 slaves were taken out of Jerusalem, out of Judea, and brought to Rome. And they were kept as slaves for generations. Their children were turned into slaves as well. And eventually, the Romans realized something. And they realized that after the first few decades of having Jews as slaves, they realized Jews have a unique quality that other slaves do not have. Jews know how to read and write. One thing that Jews have always done, time immemorial, from Moses, from Abraham probably, is teach our children to read and write. That's basics. No matter how poor we are, we teach our children to read and write. No matter how rich, no matter which part of the world, the Jewish children always knew how to read and write. An 8-year-old knew how to read the Chumash, how to read the Torah. A 13-year-old knew how to read the Talmud. Now, not everyone was blessed to be able to learn how to read the Talmud. Many were not Talmudic scholars. Talmud scholarship was really only for those who could afford a Rebbe past the age of like 11 or 12. A rabbi past that, a teacher past that time. But at the very least, Jews always taught the children to read and write. So the Romans realized, this is amazing. So we have slaves that can read and write. This is something unique and interesting. So what the Romans did was said, we are now, through conquering Europe at the time, if we look at the 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd century, that was the epitome of the Roman power. They finally were conquering the Gauls, the barbarians, the Germans, the Franks. They went to the Angles. They went to conquer the Angles up in England, in pre-England. So Rome went to go conquer Europe. They went all the way up to conquer everything. They went to Norway. They taught the Norse all about their gods, which is why the Norse had very similar gods. The Vikings had the Norse, and the Danes had very similar gods to the Romans. They learned it all from the Romans. But the Romans said, when we establish any territory, we need clerks. So they moved the Jews out of Rome, and they moved them into Europe to be clerks. That is where and how the Jews landed in Germany, in France, the rest of part of Prussia, that's where they landed. In England, that's where they landed, because the Rome took their slaves and their slaves' children, brought them with them into Europe, and said, you will be the clerks. You will be the magistrates here. You have no power, but at least you could be the clerks, and you could write down what the magistrate says. So the magistrate himself might be Roman, and he might also be completely illiterate. But you'll keep all the records, and you'll keep the tallies, and this is how the Jews moved to Europe. And until about the 10th century, Jews had a fine time in Europe. They were living, they were growing, they were thriving all along the Rhineland. They were growing and thriving, and this was even before Germany was even a thought. They were up and down the Rhineland. It was the Prussian kingdom, the Germanic people, Prussian kingdom. There was by no sense was it a kingdom or a country yet. And this is even before the king. This is even before the different kingdoms that split up Germany. When you had Würzburg and you had kingdoms to the north, and the different dukes and different duchesses and different kingdoms that were during the Middle Ages. That was the 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th centuries. But this is before, when Germany was just a lot of villages, and the Jews thrived there, and that's where they were, and they were there, and they were also living in Norway. Then they were in England. Of course, when the Normans took over England, they expelled the Jews. Congratulations, Normans. And then they were in France, and of course the Franks, they expelled the Jews in the 13th century, or 1300s, one of them, either 13th century, 1300s, right around there, they expelled their Jews. Anyway, but Jews in Germany, that's how they got there. And until the pogroms from the Crusades in 1096, when that started, that's really what started the suffering in Europe. There was unbelievable German scholarship that was lost because of the pogroms. There's unbelievable scholarship There was commentary on the Talmud. There was commentary on the Torah. There was liturgy. There was poetry. There was legal rulings. It was an unbelievable time for Germany in the 8th, 9th, and 10th centuries. I'm sorry, 1000s, 800, 900s, 1000s. It was an unbelievable time. And then 1086, not only was there an incredible slaughter of lives, there was documentation. Everything was on parchment. Everything had to be written down either on leather or parchment. Unbelievable amount of loss of documentation that was destroyed, burned in fires, destroyed when this came through. An unbelievable amount of scholarship was lost. And unfortunately, they had to start almost anew, and which they did, because there was great people like Rabbi Shlomo Itzaki, who was Rashi. There was his grandson, and there was others. There was the Bali Tosfos. The Bali Tosfos means those who created the addendum. There was yeshiva, where they would basically have a commentary on the Talmud, and obviously Rashi learned from his Rabbeim, but then he wrote a explanation on the Torah, the books of Moses, and also the prophets, and also the writings, and he based it based on the Medrash. He had access to a lot of books. He was rich. He was able to have access to a lot of books because he was a scholar. So he went ahead and he wrote this down. And then there was another great tragedy, a terrible tragedy. In the 1200s, 24 wagon loads of Jewish manuscripts were burnt. 24 wagon loads. And there is a dirge, a kinnis that we have dedicated to it. I'm looking for it now. We're going to find it. Here we go. The French king of Louis IX. And this was in the late 1250s, 1260s, 1268. He decided that there was Pope Gregory IX. So we already had pogroms in 1086, and we already had destruction then. Then there was a second pogrom in the 1100s, and now we're in the mid-1200s. And there was an apostate, Nicholas Danin of La Rocha. He was an apostate in a vicious Jew hatred, and this is what vicious Jew hatred, and what were Jews doing? Jews were just staying to themselves and learning and doing their own thing. Instead, he had vicious anti-Semitism, Jew hatred. He did not like the fact that the Jews were able to study and learn, and this was not his cup of tea. So 500 Jews from these, so he went ahead and attacked these cities in France. 500 Jews from these cities surrendered on the threat of death, and 3,000, and they were baptized and forced to convert. 3,000 others refused conversion, and they were killed. But it gets worse. He realized the great power of the Jews is their scholarship. So what did he do? He said he basically was a modern day Don Brazian. What's this guy's name? I forgot what his name is. Don Brazian, Blazian, whatever this loser's name is. This guy with so much steroids in him, his brain is like shrunk to the size of a pea. He basically was the common day that saying how bad the Talmud was. This guy, neither Don nor this guy Nicholas Danin, interesting, same name, of Rochelle, neither of them read the Talmud. Neither of them know anything about Talmud, but yet they lambaste the Talmud. So he basically went to the Pope, and he told the Pope Gregory IX, you should know the Talmud says terrible things about Jesus and about Christians and about Gentiles. He had no idea, but he figured it must say it, right? It must be true. So he went ahead and told that, and he told them that the Jews want to take over to kill the Christians, and all Jews do is bad things. This is the epitome of that Jew hatred at that time. This is the 1250s. So the Pope issued an investigation. At least he was smart. He issued an investigation. So he issued an investigation, and he had all the copies of the Talmud confiscated. And by the way, when we say Talmud, we don't just mean the Talmud. We mean all commentaries on the Bible, all commentaries on the Torah, all commentaries on the prophets and writings, writings on religious law, writing on Jewish law, writing on customs, writing on the Talmud, commentaries on the Talmud, all of that. He had all of that seized through an evaluation. And the churchmen of France were only, so they, of course, people in France only were too eager to obey. So on March 3rd, 1240, while the Jews were in Shul, it was a Saturday, all of their sacred tomes and their lockers were all confiscated. They barged in. They ransacked the Aron Kodesh, took Torahs. They took all copies of all that. Remember, this is handwritten, all the handwritten manuscripts they had. And on the 12th of June of 1240 of that year, there was a public debate in Paris between an eminent rabbinical authority and France. Now, this, by the way, was the great Nachmanides. And they had Nachmanides also debate a Jew who had left the fold and had went to Christianity voluntarily, and he became this big Christian ideologue. So he had this debate. Anyway, at this time, the debate was between Rabbi Yechiel ben Yosef. He was the head of the yeshiva in Paris, the head of the study seminary in Paris, and many of the major sages of that period had studied under him. And that's the debate. He debated. So he debated a Christian. He debated this Christian, Nicholas Donnan. Anyway, so the debate happened, and you know how debates go. Every side thinks they won. That's how debates are, right? Because when debates usually happen, one person speaks, the next person speaks. Those who believe the first person, the Talmud is correct, believe the rabbi. And some people who were intellectually honest were swayed. But of course, people who just hate and people who want to get a foregone conclusion, so they agreed, obviously, with the Christian debater. And apparently, they decided that the Talmud is a poison. And over 12,000 manuscripts, 24 cartloads of manuscripts of the Talmud, of commentary on the Talmud, on Jewish law, commentary on the Torah, Torah scrolls, 24 cartloads, 12,000 manuscripts were burnt in a great pyre, publicly. And there is a dirge, Mem Aleph 41, dedicated to this tragedy. There was a German rabbi, one of the aforementioned Baalei Tosfos. Baalei Tosfos was the yeshiva who did a commentary of halakhic rulings from the Talmud. Practical halakhic rulings of the Talmud was obviously centuries before, so they wanted to see exactly how the Talmud ruled and then to apply it to modern day events. And one of them was he was Maram Rottenberg, and he was a young boy at the time. He was about 8 or 9 at the time, and he saw these wagon loads burnt, and he's the one who wrote this kinnis. His name was Meir ben Baruch, and he was from Rothenburg, which was a place in Germany, and Germany and France kept changing their borders, and he went ahead and he witnessed this, and later on in his life, he wrote this dirge. Let me just take some comments. How do I deal with people who are so knowledgeable? Listen, you gotta know where it comes from. I imagine, people want to believe what they want to believe a lot of times. I remember I was in college once. I was young in college once, and people would rah about a certain thing, and before you even wanted to investigate it, you were on board. The problem is people always want to be right. So if their friends are for something, they want to be with their friends, and they get onto something, and they join a protest, they join a board or whatever it is, or a group. People always want to know if they're right, so they're trying to constantly look for ways to figure out how they're right. And there's no end to the playbook that changes daily, that adds new things daily of how right that side is. When Jews look at the Nazis, The only thing we really say about the Nazis is that they exterminated the Jews. They confiscated our possessions. They rounded us up and they exterminated us. I don't go looking for every bad thing about the Nazis. I don't say, well, Hitler had a small, tiny mustache. I don't say, well, Goebbels couldn't get it up for his wife. I don't say that, oh, Hitler was an Austrian, and why did they even bother following him? Or he was a terrible painter, or, you focus on, if people do something bad to you, focus on the bad they're doing to you. The fact that people are constantly digging up things about Jews is telling. In other words, it's not enough to say your fake fantasy story about what our Jews are doing, because you know that it's a lie. Deep down, you know it's a lie. You know that Hamas is doing it. You know the UN is also at fault. You know that there's two sides to every story. You know that it's not just one side. You know that deep down. So what do? You start making up, oh, every Jew's European. No, that's not true, because Israel is made up of 2 million Arabs, first of all, and of the 8 million Jews that are there, 65% of them are Middle Eastern or from Africa. So only 35% of the Jews in Israel are from Ashkenaz or European descent. From those 35% of Jews that are from Ashkenaz European descent, probably 15% of them came from Spain, came from Morocco, came from the other places before they left Europe. I know my family came from Spain before we left Germany. They left Spain during the Inquisition and the Spanish War, and established a city, a little town in Germany. And of course, we follow all the German practices, but because we were there from Germany from the 1600s. But from the 1600s until 1933, when my family was living in this town, I could trace my family back all the way down in this town from the early 1600s till 1933. I have the records. So all that time. So, and yes, we were Jewish. No one converted. No Jews appeared out of nowhere from the Khuzar or whatever it is. So, therefore, of those 35% Jews, and 50% of them were anyway from Spain and anywhere else. So, and then you look at all these videos coming out of Gaza and coming out of all these, and you see that there are blonde-haired, blue-eyed kids. You know, there are Palestinians that are blonde-haired, blue-eyed. They're more Aryan than Aryans. And you have like, but you have to say, oh, Jews are white, even though 2 million Arabs plus of this 8 million of this, plus there are 6 million Mizrahi Jews and only 2 million Ashkenaz Jews. But yeah, sure, Israel is a white country, sure. Jews aren't. I love this. This is one of my favorite ones. Jews are not really Jews. They were Khuzars. So I hate Jews because they're Jews, but I also want to say they're not really Jews, they're Khuzars. So we're not really Jews, we're Khuzars, but I hate them anyway because they're Jews. Mind-blowing logic. Bravo to that one. When you have to go through such stretches, then you know you're not right. You know that you're on the wrong side of history. You know you're on the wrong side of everything. All right, so let's read this, 41. O Torah, by fire you consumed and seek the welfare of your mourners and those who yearn to lodge in the courtyard of your dwelling, and for those who roll the dust of the Holy Land and those distressed and bewildered by the incineration of your scrolls, of those who walk in the darkness of exile, deprived of illumination, and those who wait hopefully for the light of day, which will shine upon them and upon you. Seek the welfare of the sighing mortal who cries with a broken heart, who constantly laments over the excruciating pains of your suffering, who howls like a serpent and an ostrich, and cries out a bitter eulogy on your behalf. Oh, how did this come to pass, O Holy Torah, that you who were given by God in an all-consuming fire on Sinai should be consumed by man-made fires, and yet those alien intruders. Remember, we're talking about the burning of the 24 wagon loads of Torah scrolls and Talmud documents and commentaries and law that were burnt in France in the 1240s. who burned you and escaped unscathed your flaming coals. Until when, O pampered Gentile nations, will you lounge in excessive serenity while the face of my blossoming youths are covered with thistles? You sit in the overbearing arrogance to judge the children. Oh, actually, this is very applicable for today. Of God of every libelous accusation, and you drag us before your judges like the UCC. Interesting. Wow, this is actually applicable. This was written. This was written in the 13th century. 13th century. How apropos. In addition, you issue a decree to burn the fiery law and statutes. Therefore, praiseworthy is he who will repay you, who will punish you what you deserve. O my rock, my redeemer, who transmits Torah from Sinai with flames and fire. Was it with this in mind that God gave the Torah, so that in the end the edges of your column should be set ablaze? O Sinai, was it with this reason that God chose you, while he spurned taller mountains, and made his light shine within your boundaries, so that your Torah should be destroyed? Did God choose you, Sinai, the lowest mountain, to be an ominous sign, the Torah, the overlord, to show how humble, to show how modest the Torah is, that it should be belittled and forced to descend from its glory? Behold, I will illustrate your condition with appropriate parables. This may be compared to the king who wept at his son's wedding. Written in the 13th century, baby, 13th century. This may be compared to the king who wept at his son's wedding feast because he foresaw his son's demise. So too, Sinai, did you foretell your fate and see what happened with your own words? Therefore, Sinai, instead of your royal robe, garb yourself in sackcloth, cloak yourself in a widow's garb, change your attire, and I shall shed tears until the flow like a river that reaches to the gravesite of your two most noble princes. They are Moses and Aaron, who were on Mount Horeb. Horeb is another name for Sinai. And I will ask them if there is perhaps a new Torah. Therefore your scrolls have been burnt. They accept the Torah during Sivan, which was the third month, and later named Sivan, the third month. But the fourth month is when they revolted against the Torah and destroyed your light. And the fifth month, they were completely destroyed. The tablet of the law was shattered by Moses. And the folly was repeated by incinerating the law in fire. Is this the payment for and your double reward for having Torah? I wonder to myself, how can food ever again be pleasant to my taste after I have seen what you're plundered and gathered? Into the main public square they heap the Torah scrolls, like the condemned property of an apostate city. There men rejected the entering of your congregation. They burnt the exalted spoils. I know not how to find the straight road which will lead me to fathom your ways. Has not your straight path, your shrouded mourning. Again, we're reading Dirge 41 from the Kinnis of the Tisha B'Av ceremony, written in the 13th century. It would be sweeter to my mouth than honey to mix tears into my drink, and have my feet chained to shackles, so that I might properly commiserate with your sorrow. It would be pleasant to my eyes to absorb the waters of my tears, until the tears would disappear for all those who cling to the edges of your robes. But they would evaporate as they roll down my cheeks, because my compassion is intense, and my wanderings of my master God took his pursuit of his silver pieces, and embarked on a distant journey. And behold, when he departed your sheltering shadow fields, and I am left behind like some bereft of all children, utterly forlorn. So I been all alone. I am like a lone flagstaff planted atop your towering mountain peak, all alone. No longer do I hear the sound of your musicians, male and female, because the strings of your musician instruments have been torn and shorn and destroyed. I will cloth and cover myself with sackcloth, because your martyrs are very precious to me, and as powerful and numerous as the sand are the souls of your corpses. I am deeply perplexed by the light of the day which shines brightly towards everyone, yet towards you and me it casts only darkness. Oh, cry out the rock. Turi means the rock is God. It's a name for God when he's our salvation, when he's our steadfast. Oh, cry out to the rock with bitter voice over your ruination and your debilitation. Oh, if only he would remember the love of your wedding day. That was when we got the Torah at Sinai. Gird yourself with garments of sackcloth over the conflagration. which burst out and tore you to pieces and wiped out your towering Torah scholars. May the rock of salvation, Tsuri, the Goali, comfort you according to the days of your affliction, and may you return the captivity of the tribes to Yeshurun. Yeshurun refers to Moses, it also refers to Yerushalayim, and exalt your degraded ones. Once again will I adorn yourself with ornaments and scarlet, and you will take up the tambourine and go out in circle and dance and rejoice in your dancing. At that time the heart will be uplifted when the rock will be a light unto you to brighten the darkness and illuminate your gloom. Powerful, unbelievable words by Rav Meir of Rothenburg, who was a little child when he saw 24 wagon loads of Torah, scrolls, and commentary being burned. Basically, the scholarship coming out of France and coming out of Germany ruined almost forever. Unbelievable how much more the world would know. And it's amazing because Christian scholars turn to Jewish scholars. There are so many Christian scholars that look at Rashi, that look at the Ibn Ezra, that look at commentaries on the Torah to understand the Torah properly. You know, if your idea is to understand God's word, then it doesn't make a difference necessarily where it came from. If it comes from a place of honesty and integrity, and the idea is to understand God's word, and Christians believe it's God's word, at least I think a lot of Christians still believe that the original Testament, Torah, writings of prophets, is still God's word. Definitely the 5 books of Moses is God's words. Whether or not you have this whole debate about yourself, whether you got to keep them, follow them, how much you have to follow them, how much you have to, do the practice. Is there a new covenant? Not a new covenant. The bottom line is, even Muslims would agree, it's God's word. Muslims don't think that it was abolished. They just, Muslims also believe that it was God's word. And if they think that there was a change of mind per se, or whatever it was, and moving on, however your belief system is, the bottom line is, just because God wrote something at one time and for some reason you think it no longer applies to you, doesn't mean it's not from God. How much scholarship was lost because one person decided to tell the Pope how much he hated Jews? It's unfathomable. And now people, when I teach a Torah, they like to talk and like to say to me, God is a vengeful God because God made the flood, right? The deluge, and he also destroyed people, Sodom and Gomorrah, right? So therefore God is a terrible God, right? Because he killed all these people by the deluge, he killed people by Sodom and Gomorrah. If you could see how terrible people act and the way we're going, really? God is who you question, not mankind? You see what mankind is capable of doing to each other around the world with the good earth that we're put on, and you blame God? No. Look at the mirror. Mirrors were invented for a reason. There's a reason why shiny metal reflects an image. God wasn't stupid. God needed us to look into ourselves. There's a reason why mirrors were invented. There's a reason why they're there. Because we need to look at ourselves as humans. Rome sacked Jerusalem because of money. And they destroyed the temple because they wanted to make sure that there wouldn't be another rebellion. And there was anyway. There were several other rebellions, even though the temple was destroyed. Jews never lost that grasp for their homeland. Masada, 3 years after the sack of Jerusalem. The year 117, another rebellion. There was a rebellion in Egypt around the same time, actually, against Rome. Jews in Egypt, again, rebelling against Rome, and Jews did it already in 66. And again, 132, 133, the Bar Kokhba revolt from Beitar, another rebellion. When almost everyone who lived to see the temple 60 some odd years before were gone, or old men. New people took up the cause. Even though they were living in the land, they still rebelled. They wanted sovereignty over the land. we never left. And then those who did leave and were forced out because they were enslaved and brought away from Babylon, they came. And from Egypt, they came. And from Europe, when they were brought by the Romans, they came. 1100s, 1200s, 1300s, 1400s, establishing synagogues, establishing schools, establishing new areas outside of the old city in Jerusalem, establishing new cities, Tel Aviv, building up Haifa, building up Akko, building up Tzfas, building up Tzipporah, building up everywhere. Beis Lechem, known as Bethlehem, building up Kiryat Arba, Hebron, just constantly. This is not new. This is not a new phenomenon that Jews want to be in Jerusalem. When one day a year we still mourn over the destruction of our temple, clearly our heart is in Israel. Israel meaning Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. And if there is a government there that is protecting Jewish people, then could you blame a Jew for wanting that government to do what's best? And also, when one side is a government that gives the world medicine and technology, and every crisis that happens globally, Israel is the first ones to send aid. Hurricane Katrina, there was aid. Hurricane in Houston, there was aid. There was a hurricane hit Haiti, earthquake hit Haiti, Israel was there. Tsunami in Japan, Israel was there. There's anything that goes on around the world, Israel is the first to send aid there. And not only that, but medicines that they develop and send around the world, and microchips and data processors and programs like GPS and like Waze, cell phone technology, all these things. MRI machines, CAT scan machines, detailed imaging, whatever, you name it. If it's science, if it's medicine, if it's, there are Jews. Why is it that Jews are less than 1% of the world's population, and we make up 22% of all the Nobel prizes in the mathematics and sciences? Because Jews give to the world. And if you let us, we will continue to give. But if you hate, you will only end up at hating. That's it. All you think about is hate. And that's all you'll have. A person who lives with hate only has hate. That's all he has. Jews will continue to live rent-free in people's minds so long as you hate us for no reason. When we can have, I saw this video the other day, and it's going to be, I'll probably post it later this week. And it's a perfect example. This guy is walking down the street in some neighborhood, probably Brooklyn. He sees two Hasidic kids. They must be 13, 14 years old because they're wearing their hats. So clearly they're over bar mitzvah because they're wearing their hats. And it must be a Saturday because they're wearing their long coats that they wear on Saturday. It's called Bekisha, and they're wearing their flat hats, very nice hats. These two Hasidic kids, minding their own business, probably walking from synagogue, walking to synagogue, maybe walking to a friend's house. Who cares? They're just walking. They're 13, 14 years old. And this guy who's taking the video runs up to them, knocks off their hats, and runs away laughing. And he's yelling, "Free Palestine." Tell me something, Chochem. Tell me something. How is knocking off a hat of a kid in Williamsburg on a Saturday going to help anything for Palestine? You think that kid said, "Oh, because that guy wearing that black and white scarf knocked off my hat, from now on, I am for Palestine"? Is that what you think? Is that really how low we dropped as human beings? That our common denominator is coming onto lives and other people's videos and putting flags up there and Free Palestine and other hateful slogans that has nothing to do with anything. Hi, I'm a Jew. Yesterday was my birthday. Let me tell you the tradition that Jews have on their birthday. Free Palestine, free Palestine, free Palestine. What? Hi, I have a beautiful recipe of kraploch Kreplach is a great dish. It's made of dough stuffed with meat. We put it into our soup. We eat it 3 times a year on hidden holidays. It's unbelievable. It's a great Jewish food. Free, free Palestine, and Zionism, anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, blah 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 blah. Really? Kreplach? On a Kreplach recipe. Is this how far we've sunk as human beings? That we feel so poorly about ourselves. We have no self-esteem, no self-awareness whatsoever. The only way that we could make ourselves feel better is if we post something hurtful to someone else, and then for a second it makes us feel better because I got him. I got him. Maybe, just maybe, it's gonna trigger that guy and he's gonna get upset. And that's what makes me happy when he gets upset. I have no happiness in my life. But if I make him upset, maybe he'll make me happy for a second or two. Maybe I have to hold on to like a clean that memory. Remember 4 hours ago when I knocked that kid's head off? Back to your sad life. Is this really what humanity has come to? This is what we've come to, where the only way you feel like you can function as a human being is by trying to hurt someone else? You know, if you're not religious, I understand in a way, because there is a point of view that people without religion have no morals. They have no clarity, they have no, humans need something in life to do. Humans need a goal. Humans need a cause. Which is why non-religious Jews make the best advocates for the world's causes. If you want to make a cause against Israel, the first person on board will be an irreligious Jew. I'm not saying all irreligious Jews will jump on board, but I guarantee you, if you have a cause, I want Israel to be disbanded, the first person online will be an irreligious Jew. If you have a cause the Holocaust did not happen, I guarantee you the first online will be an irreligious Jew. I guarantee you Norman Finkelstein will be on that line, the Holocaust not happened. He'll be torn because, in a way, his entire existence is the fact that his parents went through the Holocaust. Otherwise, he's a complete nothing. A debunked intellectual, a person who's been shunned from universities. You can't get a job anywhere. But Norman Finkelstein exists on his reputation that his parents went through the Holocaust. So he'll be torn because, on the one hand, my entire existence is that my parents went through the Holocaust. On the other hand, I like to think that maybe the Holocaust did not happen. I'm for it. I'm with you. He'll be the first online, torn, but he'll be the first online. Any cause in the world, you'll have an irreligious Jew, because irreligious Jews have this in them. They need a cause. They need something to go for. They need a purpose in life. And if it's not the Torah, it's not their religion, it's not their family tradition, it's not their community, then they go ahead and seek it elsewhere. And that's why you see irreligious Jews so prevalent in Black Lives Matter, in anti-Israel, anti-democracy, communist, pro-socialism, pro-communism, whatever the cause is. Oh, feed the hungry Sudanese, so therefore they have energy to kill other Sudanese, whatever it is. However you want to put it, send more bombs to Ukraine so they could send more bombs to Russia, and Russia can send more bombs to whatever it is. Whatever cause you want, there's going to be an irreligious Jew there. Because when you're a Jew, and you have it in your blood and your upbringing to have a purpose in life, and that purpose is no longer your community, your Torah, or anything else, you will find it elsewhere. So don't be surprised when it's Jews who are at the forefront. By the way, that includes the Natura Kartaniks. Sure, they dress like rabbis, but they are as religious as a pig eating a Hebrew national hot dog. Okay, that's how religious they are. A pig chowing down on shellfish. That's as religious as a Natura Karta is. We went from a Rabbi Akiva, who said that the main tenet of the Torah is love a neighbor like yourself, and everything else is sort of commentary, right? That's the main tenet of the Torah, to people who just like, I stand with the people who want to kill other people. The more genocide of my own people, the better. I'm a big Buddhist rabbi with a big beard, and I wear the scarf that was borrowed from Iraq, that were taken by the Jordanians and held in captive for 19 years, and now they take it because Israel's now ruling over them, no longer Jordanians. Egypt was ruling over them for 19 years, and now Israel is. So therefore, I again for those people, and even though those people strap bombs onto themselves and walk into a pizza shop and kill all the Jews, and even though they go into buses and blow buses up, and even though they come with AK-47s, they go in the middle of Machane Yehuda, they shoot, and they throw stones down from the Temple Mount on the people praying by the Western Wall. I still stand with them because I am a loser and I'm the Torah Carta. That's the Torah Carta for you in a nutshell. That's my impersonation of the Torah Carta. That's as Jewish as they are. And that's how it is. Have we sunk so far as a society that hatred is our only motivation in life? I'm also going to play another clip later this week. It's video footage of October 8th. Now, people who are getting on board with this pro-Pali movement and Jew hatred and finding that it's very chic and very trendy and very in, it's very in to hate Jews now. It's not only is it not okay, but it's okay and it's very in. Those people getting in on it, and all your free Palestiners and all your anti-Zionismers and Zionists are Nazisers and all that stuff, and Jews are Kuzaris, and Jews are fake, and Zionism only started in the 1890s, and there was not a single Jew living in the land until 1922. Blah 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 blah. All thosers. There's interesting footage that you should see, and I'm going to put on my up on this week. And that footage is of October 8th, the protest in Times Square. October 8th. You know October 8th, 2023 was? It was within 12 hours of the massacre that happened. So Hamas and the Gazans breached the fence, they breached security, and on a holiday, and a Sabbath, by the way, on a Sabbath and on a holiday, as there was a festival going on with people dancing, and people having a good time, and people in their homes, preparing for the Sabbath and holiday meal, and people in synagogue preparing, reading the Torah and reading about the holiday services and dancing for the Torah. While this was going on, that's when Gaza struck into southern Israel, and that's when 1,200 people were murdered. And that's when hundreds of hostages were brutally beaten, raped, and taken as hostages. People taken as hostages, including babies, including elderly, including children, including whatever you want. That happens. Now I know what everyone wants to say. Oh, did it start? It didn't start October 7th. You know what? No one knows when it started. I know when it started because I can date it back to the 20s when there was a huge massacre in Hebron. People living there in peace. And by the way, in Hebron, it was an established old community for hundreds of years where Jews were living in Hebron. By the way, back probably before the Crusades, so probably before there was an Islam, there were Jews living in Hebron. And the Arabs decided to make a massacre also on a Saturday, also on a Shabbos in the 1920s, 1928, I believe, 1922 or 1928, in Hebron. And there was no Israel, there was no mandate, there was no UN resolution, there was no Zionism, none of that stuff. There just was an idea that Britain was going to get a mandate over the land and eventually split it up. And because the idea was out there was an attack on the Jews, because now we realize if this land is going to be split between Jews and why was the land split? Ever wonder why the land had to be split in the first place? Why couldn't the UN just give the land to the Jews and Arabs to govern themselves? Did anyone ever think about the UN resolution? What the heck was going on? What did the League of Nations want? The League of Nations in 1922 made a resolution that the land is going to be held by England and eventually make a state for each, the Arabs and the Jews. What? No. Make a resolution that Britain leaves, and we, who have been living here side by side together, supposedly in peace, right? Arabs, they always love to say, oh, for all those times, the Arabs always lived in peace with the Jews. Nothing ever happened between the Arabs and the Jews. And for the most part, they're right. For centuries, you know, there was under the Caliphate, the Jews second-class citizens, but were sort of allowed to live there. And then when the Caliphates and the Ottoman Empire dissolved, then it was sort of like Jews and Arabs living side by side. But anyway, why wasn't it made into a country and said, listen, the natives, you will make a new country called Palestine, and Jews and Arabs will vote on a new government, and there we go. Why? Why wasn't that the resolution? Because the Arabs from the start rejected that idea. And therefore, the nations had no choice. We want oil. And the other Arab countries have oil. So we don't want to upset the Arabs. So we'll give the Jews a land, but we'll also give the Arabs a land. That's what they decided. Okay? So, and then the first massacre happened already in 1928 in Hebron by an established community where people were living there for centuries. All right. That's just the way it is. So yes, did it start October 23rd, 2023? Anyway, there's no question that it wasn't just a suicide bomber. This wasn't just terrorism resistance. This was war. Right? Now, a little history. In 2025, Israel withdrew from Gaza. Israel actually had Gaza, and there were many, many, many Jews, thousands upon thousands of Jews living in settlements in Gaza. Israel forcibly kicked out their own citizens out of Gaza and said only Arabs could live there. Thus, Israel helped create the first apartheid state. Gaza was the first apartheid state. Arabs, but no Jews. That is apartheid, and that was an apartheid state. Jews were not allowed anymore to live in Gaza. That was an apartheid state. So yes, Gaza is an apartheid state. Agreed. And they were supposed to vote on their own government. And in 2007, they voted on their own government, and they voted on Hamas unanimously. And on October 8th, and October 9th, and October 10th of 2023, all polls coming out of Gaza was that they love Hamas. 90% of the people are still with Hamas in October and November of 2023. We love Hamas. We are still with Hamas. We still keep voting in Hamas. This is what we want. So the people live with the choices they make. They chose to start a war. There was no question it was a war, because until then, there were skirmishes, sure. There were people trying to, invade, and they would go through checkpoints, and they would drive cars into checkpoints and stuff like that. It would happen, little things here and there. But for the most part, Gaza would have and should have been thriving. And there's a lot of videos out there that show the contrast. In the beginning of this all, they like to say that Gaza was an open-air prison and it was terrible conditions. Now they have videos showing the hotels, the beaches, the shops, people happy and thriving and healthy, because they're trying now to compare between what Gaza was and what Gaza is now, supposedly rubble, supposedly. So they are now contradicting their earlier position, which was, oh, it was an open-air prison anyway, so they had no choice. No, Gaza was should have been, could have been, was thriving. But they chose to start a war against Israel on a Sabbath and on a holiday. And October 8th, 12 hours after that happened, when 1,200 Jews were massacred, raped, burnt, houses burnt, and hundreds were taken hostage, there was a protest for the first time in Times Square, where hundreds upon hundreds of college students were shipped in from Harvard and Yale, from Massachusetts, from Maryland. They were shipped in by these organizers who were ready, by the way. These organizers were ready. They had flags, they had posters, they had pamphlets. They were ready. They knew this was planned. They had permits. This was planned. Whoever coordinated in Gaza the attack already had this protest coordinated. They knew. They knew already. Everything was already coordinated and planned. 12 hours, they got all this done. They got these people shipped in, these college students who knew nothing about anything, except for they saw a pamphlet. Oh, Israel's apartheid. Israel is killing Palestinians. Israel has no right to exist. Israel are made up of Zionists. Israel is Jewish, so you can hate them. Whatever this pamphlet said. All these little, things. And they had a protest, and they shouted these slogans like, first of all, they did not, it's interesting, the videos can go through, they never mention genocide. I'm sorry. I think the video shows they do mention end the genocide. Already, October 8th, before Israel even did anything, they're already complaining that free Palestine and from the river to the sea. That's what the chants were. From the river to the sea, free Palestine. From the river to the sea, free Palestine. From the river to the sea obviously means get rid of Israel. Israel could no longer be a sovereign state, that all the Jews have to be destroyed, either kicked out, expelled, or destroyed. And free Palestine is, I don't know what that means, because it was already free in 2005 when Gaza was unilaterally withdrawn from. They had their own elections. So I don't know what you're talking about. If you're talking about free Palestine was a slogan that the Jews had pre-1948. When they wanted the British out, they had slogans, free Palestine, because they wanted Palestine free from the British. Finally, there was a UN resolution in 1947. So pre that, there was a free Palestine movement. The Jews tried to get the British out of Palestine so they could create a country. And then there was a mandate, the UN mandate, that allowed them to have the country. This is the protest. And this is what I want people to see. Because this was all coordinated. This was all ready. And the numbers in Gaza do not justify what was going on. Because the population increased by threefold. From 2005 until 2023, the population more than doubled. People were giving birth. People were getting medicine. People were thriving. Thriving in Gaza. All these pictures that are coming out now that show how good it was before. Show how good it was before. The hotels, the beaches, the marketplaces, the businesses. And I have to remember something else. Who are the people living in Gaza? Who are the people living in the West Bank? Because there are 2 million Arabs that live in Israel as citizens who are part of the IDF, who are part of the government, who are judges, who are part of the Supreme Court. So if there are Arabs that live in Israel as citizens, as equals, as just regular Israelis, there are Arab Israelis. Who are these people who are not Arab Israelis? It's only people who do not want to be Arab Israelis. It's people who reject Israel citizenship. That's the one lie that hasn't told you. That it's all because they have no right to return. It's because they reject Israel sovereignty. If they would accept Israel sovereignty, then they could be a whole new ballgame. But they reject Israel sovereignty, unlike 2 million thriving Arabs who are Arab Israelis. They could be Muslim, they could be Christian, they could be Druze. But these are not Arab Israelis because these do not want to accept sovereignty of Israel. I did not know that. I was wondering. I'm wondering how Israel has Arab citizens, but there are still people in the West Bank and in Gaza. There's always an answer. If you seek the truth, there will be an answer. Yeah, I don't think so, bro. I don't think you had 21 acres stolen by you from the West Bank. Because while it is true that there are settlements being built in the West Bank, but it's an open land. It's not a land that's owned by anybody. So if it's stolen, it wasn't stolen by Israel. Okay, Israel just doesn't come in and steal people's land there. Okay, I know that story. So the Palestinian Authority took your land. Very good. Okay, so stolen by a Palestinian Authority, obviously, because that's your government. That's the government of in the West Bank, which is, by the way, Yehuda Shomron. And yes, there are areas where aren't settled, and Jews like to build settlements there, and they like to Israel does not like it, because Israel has to then send the army to protect them, because they can't live in peace there, because an Israeli Jew or Israeli Arab who builds anywhere in the West Bank all of a sudden will be attacked by anyone, an Arab in the West Bank. That's a wonderful, great way to live, by the way, is that I want to build a house in the middle of a desert here, in the middle of the no man's land on a highway, in the middle of nowhere, but I know I'm going to get shot at, because once I build a house here, I know that I'm going to be shot at by the Arabs, so that now the army has to come protect me. It's a ridiculous existence. What does POS stand for? To POS. No, by Jewish settlers, to POS. To point of service. I don't know what that means. Huh. Every story has another story behind it, obviously. Anyway, so yes, so it's important to note that hitting a kid's hat off his head in Williamsburg is not going to free Palestine, and writing comments on people's pages is not going to free Palestine, or whatever you're trying to get from free Palestine. Hate is only going to just beget hate. That's just the way it is. And the more people are caught up in that, the more it's just going to have the cycle of violence. And by the way, the theory is that once Jews are gone, there's going to be peace. You're kidding yourself. Arabs cannot live in peace. Do you see the Sunnis and the Shiites fighting each other? Do you see the Kurds and the Iraqis? Do you see the way in Sudan? Do you see what's going on in Congo? Do you see what's going on in between India and Pakistan? There are no Jews involved in any of that stuff. Do you see what's happening to the Druze in Syria? Jews are not involved with the Druze in Syria. Lebanon with their civil wars. Don't kid yourself and think, oh, once the Jews are out of there, it will be a stable, peaceful region. You are kidding yourself. What will make it a peaceful and stable region is what's happening with the Abraham Accords. As more and more Arab countries get on board with peace, Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, as more and more places get on board, then there's going to be peace in the area. And that's it. And there could be peace. There could be, if you have a thriving country there that's bringing in so much of medicine and technology, so why not? Then you could have a thriving Gaza again. Also, Gaza gets so much aid from around the world. They didn't spend it on tunnels and missiles. They would have anything they wanted, anything they needed, right there. Anyway, that's the sadness of burning of the manuscripts of the Torah. There's several other dirges that again start with Sion, that word, and then we have. I'm going to read the memory of the Holocaust, and this is a dirge that was written by Rabbi Shimon Schwab. Rabbi Shimon Schwab was a rabbi in Frankfurt before the war in the 1930s, and he ran to America before the Shoah started. Right before it started, he was actually taken to a concentration camp in the 30s when they were taking Jews to concentration camps before, and then he was released. And then after that experience, he ran to America with whatever the jacket or the hat he had on, and that's where he was. And he wrote this dirge about the Holocaust. And again, one day a year, Jews mourn our temple, we mourn the loss of our land, and we mourn all tragedies that happened to us throughout the year. and any anniversary date of the year, we mourn it on this day, the ninth day of the fifth month of the lunar calendar called Tisha B'Av, ninth day above. So he writes, Hazocher, remember. He who remembers those who remember him, each generation as holy ones, since the time you have chosen us, may he remember the gruesome faith of the last generation. Woe, what has happened to us. Those who were swept away by the flood of blood, who sacrificed their lives, all who were submerged in a valley of tears, may God think of them in the lands of eternal life. May their memory be a blessed for all eternity. Lift up your hands to him, capital H, to him, to God. Woe, O you heavens, woe over the best of Israel's tribes. Communities and congregations, cities and districts, fraternities, foundations, all rendezvous with God. If only streams of water could pour down from eyes toward waterfalls of the rivers of the tears, for the 1,000 times and thousands of corpses consumed in the fire of the destruction and horrors. For the princes of Torah, the pillars of tradition, for the young followers of the priesthood, for the diligent scholars, to the men, teachers, and women, and the precious children in their schools, the trusting daughters, the elderly grandparents, and their offspring, and the infants whom they bore, everyone, including the myriads beloved in life, not parted by death. Seek out their blood when you, God, take count of all the scattered, rent leaves and every life perished. In the day of destruction and calamity of 6,000 times 1,000, 6 million. An entire third to be destroyed by the blitzkrieg fury of the cherished vineyards you dearly loved. O avenger of blood, the memory of their misery, please do not erase the book you have written. Remember the moans and the tumultuous screams when they were herded for slaughter. May the river of their blood and the tears of their faces not be forgotten forever. Every tremble, every groan, every piercing cry of those torn asunder by hordes of dogs, remember and count them, collect them into the young flask, till the time the degraded one's shame is avenged. In the barbarians' camps were pain and sickness, the anguish of mortified souls, insult and mockery, shame and spit, searing wounds from horrible blows. I'm reading, again, the Dirge, the Kinnah, written by Rabbi Shimon Schwab of Germany. After the Holocaust, he wrote about the Holocaust. I'm reading it in English. Hunger, thirst, frenzy, sorrow, the faint stumbling without any strength, every death rattle of every forlorn one, far be it from you to forget. The pillars of smoke, the fumes from furnace, piles and piles of bones and sinews, poison-filled hoils, the roaring sound of the multitude, choking gas chambers, the stench of the bodies, the tortured corpses, fertilizer for soil of the blasphemers, how the tormentors turned their fat into soap. That actually was done by, that was actually debunked. But anyway, he has it in here. But there were several people turned to soap, but that was a Nazi intellectual from Austria who did it. It wasn't Nazi policy, and it wasn't another mess. Anyway, and human skin into fermentine adornments. That it was done. Skin was used for lampshades. Remember the finger motions of the savage officers. To the right, slave labor. To the left, the shadow of death. Remember how the sharpshooters shot at the diggers in their own graves, lowering them to the depths of the agony of the grave. Now they afflicted our sisters and mutilated our daughters. Doses of poison from sadistic doctors, and fugitive survivors in burrows and bunkers, and the disappearance of children in houses of apostasy. In monasteries, unblemished sheep completely consumed. The blood of diaspora's children. Woe, O Ariel, for the corpses of your devoted ones, who could count a sacred flock, whose flames will never be extinguished. Your tested ones who are sanctified of your name. With the cry of the Shema Yisrael, they gave up their lives to God so that he might gather them in. And until the very last day, they justified your judgment and called out, Ani Ma'amin, I believe. And they sang the songs as they were thrust into the chambers. And now a people is left bewildered as an orphan, without graves at which to pray, without tombstones, without even knowing the date of death. Where to weep and lament of emotions, of hearts filled with tears. Only blood libations are their memorial, boiling, unforgettable, and the mounds of ashes of the Akedah, which was the marking of Isaac, and attributes from the altar's ashes. And tributes from the altar's ashes. Who can express Israel's torment, whose mind is frenzied by misery? The remnant of his splendor is a fraction of a bit. How its pride is humbled today. O living God, merciful God, comforting congregation that yearns for you so mightily. Let new light shine, let rays of glory glow, and may God's Spirit hover. The most powerful thing about a dirge like this, and what I saw from my grandparents, who went through the horrors, is their faith, is their belief. God is just, God is kind, God is merciful, even after seeing those atrocities. Things don't go your way. You don't get that job. You don't get that big deal. Your kid doesn't make the team. Your wife doesn't love you anymore. All of a sudden, God, how could there be a good God? How could God be good if bad things happen in the world? Woe is me, woe is me, woe is me. People who went through these atrocities and they still say, God is good, God is merciful, God is kind, God is just. God is justice. We don't understand it, but God is just. That's the most powerful thing that comes out from someone to write a dirge like that. Sure, we lament and we mourn the 6 million. We have no graves to pray by, to visit. We have no date of anniversary to give tikkun, to say kaddish for. But we're left with the memories, the ashes, and we're left to pick up the pieces. There were about 15.6 million Jews before the Holocaust. It's about that number right now. We just about almost recoup the numbers from pre-Holocaust days. 80 years later, we're still trying to recoup the numbers of the Holocaust. And yet, we still sit on the ground, and we still mourn our temple, and we still wait and yearn for God, and cry over what he's lost, cry over losing him, cry over what we've lost, cry over the connection that we don't have, cry over the offerings we can't bring, cry over the priestly songs we can't hear, cry over the music for the Levites that we can no longer enjoy, cry over the great and magnificent temple we can't visit, we can't pray by, we can't bow to, we can't supplicate. We are in exile. God's Holy Spirit is in exile. There's no temple, holy temple. And once a year we sit on the ground all morning and we say these dirges, and the rest of the afternoon we contemplate them. Even if we get up from the ground, we still contemplate them. We don't eat, we don't drink, we don't bathe, we don't have relations, we don't engage in business. We don't learn Torah. There's only a few parts of Torah that I learn. Those are the parts that talk about destruction and those type of prophecies, like chapter 26 of Leviticus, chapter 28 of Deuteronomy. Certain parts of the Talmud that talk about the destruction of the temple, first temple, second temple, parts of Jeremiah, parts of Ezekiel, parts of Isaiah, including Isaiah 53. Don't shove down my throat. Learn Isaiah 53. The next person tells me Jews don't learn Isaiah 53. I'm going to tell them Christians don't learn Deuteronomy 4. If Christians learn Deuteronomy 4, then we can talk. Read Deuteronomy 4. Then let me know how Christian you are after that. Anyway, this is what we do. Now we say these dirges. So it's well past midday, but I figured there's not much else Torah we can talk about, so might as well talk about these. Now I'm going to sing one last one, and this is a song that goes back hundreds of years, probably 1,000 years. This song goes back. It was written probably in either the early Middle Ages, probably the 10th, 11th century. It was written by even earlier than that. Maybe it was written by the original poets in the 8th or 7th century in Israel. And it uses the word Sion because, again, Sion refers to Jerusalem, refers to the land of Israel, refers to the people of Israel. In our ever longing to return, even after the first temple to return, after the second temple to return to our land, even after we never left the land, that Sion should return to his glory. And of course, those that did leave the land, 97,000 slaves that were taken by Rome outside of Judea and brought to Rome and then dispersed in Europe. And those that were in Babylon and living in other countries in the Middle East and North Africa and making our way back. So it's called the Late Sion. It's 45, third 45. It's called the Late Sion. A Late Sion means whale. It's Eli, Aleph Lamed, we know, according to every Christian and Messianic, it means God. But obviously, it means other things also. El means two, like Vaydaber Hashem El Moshe, God spoke. El Moshe to Moshe, not God spoke, God Moshe. El means two, El means God, could mean God. And Eli, El also means whale. It's sort of like a onomatopoeia. Oh. It's a sound you make when you wail. It's an onomatopoeia. Oh. Means to wail. So Eli, wail for me, or I wail. I bemoan, or I wail, or wail for me. Sion. I'm going to read it in English, and then I'm going to sing it in the centuries-old tune that we sing this. I wail, O Sion, and her cities, like a woman suffering from birth travail, and like a maiden girded in sackcloth, lamenting for the husband of her youth, for the palace that is abandoned because of sin of the sheep of her flocks, and for the entrance of the blasphemers of God into the chambers of the sanctuary, for the exile of the priests, the servants of God, and the Levites, who sweetly sang the songs of her praise, and for the blood that was spilt like the waters of her canals, for the lyrics of her dances and has been stilled in her cities, and for the assembly chambers that have been abandoned with the disbandment of Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin was the high court, the ones who wrote the Talmud, the ones who were the Supreme Court of Judea. They interpreted the law and they applied it to the facts. For her daily Talmud offering, and for the Talmud offering meaning the daily offering, for daily offering, and for the redemption of the firstborn son, and for the desecration of the temple's vessels, and her incense altar. The young children of her kings and the sons of David, her royal sovereigns, and for her beauty which was darkened, with her crowns that were taken from her. For the divine glory, which was exiled at the time of the destruction of her temples, and for the tyrant who persecuted her, and caused her to gird herself in sackcloth. Again, her meaning Sion, her meaning Jerusalem, her meaning the land of Israel. We're mourning now, oh, the land of Israel. The land of Israel also suffers in exile until it will once again be governed by Jews with the Torah, with the Sanhedrin, with the Great Assembly, and, of course, with the Anointed One. For the pounding and the numerous blows and which her aristocrats were beaten, and for the smashing of the rock of her infants and her youths. For the joy of her enemies when they made sport of her calamities, and for the tormenting of her free-spirited men and the noble-minded and the pure-hearted people, and for the sin which corrupted her, and diverted her footsteps from the straight path, and the legions of her congregation, whose faces now are wrinkled and blackened by the flames of the temple's destruction. For the cries of those who vilified her, when the number of her corpses increased, and the clamor of those who curse her inside the courtyard of her tabernacle. And for the name which was profound by the mouth, for your name meaning God's name, which was profaned by the mouth, and for those who arose to torment Sion, and to the plentiful prayer which to cry out to you, listen carefully and heed the words. Wail, O Zion, and her cities, like a woman suffering from birth travail, and like a maiden girded in sackcloth, lamenting for the husband of her youth. Alei Tzion ve'ero'eh, kimo isho b'tzireho, v'chivsu lo chagud asak, al ba'al niureho, alei armon asher nutash, Ash maso nadoreho, vial vias michor fe'el, bisoch mikdash chadoreho, alei golus mishor se'el, man ime shir zemoreho, vial domo masher shupach, kimoi meimei yoreho, alei hegyoin michoi leho, Asher domam bioreho, vial viad asher shomein, ubitul sanhedreho, alei zivchei semideho, ufidyoinei bechoireho, vial chilul kelei echol, umizbach kitoireho, Alei tape milocheho, b'nei David givireho, v'al yofyo masher choshach, be'esorur chisoreho, alei chavod asher golo, v'eis churban divireho, v'al lochetz asher lochatz, v'som sakim chagureho, alei machatz v'rov makos, asher huku nizireho, v'al niputz alei sela, olaleho unureho, alei simchas oyeveho, sochaku al shovoreho, v'al inoi b'nei chorin, nidiveho teoreho, alei fesha asher iviso, silul derech ashureho, v'al tzivos keholeho, shizufeho shichoreho, alei kolos michorefeho, v'eis rabu figoreho, v'al rigshas migadifeho, v'soch mishkan chatzereho, alei shimcha asher kulal, v'fi komei mitzireho, v'al tachan yitzavichu, loch kishov ushma mareho, alei tzion ve'oreho, kimo isha b'tzireho, v'chivsu lo chagud asak, al ba'al niureho, alei tzion ve'ereho, kimo isha b'tzireho, v'chivsu lo chagud asak, al ba'al niureho. That concludes the kinnis, the dirges. The day is not done. The day is not done. As sun sets on this day, I just imagine what life was like in Jerusalem at the time of the temple. It's the 9th of Av, the 9th day of the 5th month of the lunar calendar. Passover is the 15th day of the first month. So Passover was not long ago. And then we had Pentecost. Pentecost was 50 days after Passover. That was about a month and a half ago. 3 weeks ago, on the 17th day of the fourth month, the temple closed to service. All service in the temple ceased. Daily, there was brought 2 lambs, 1 year old, twins, or lookalikes, about the same value, every day. Weekday, holiday, Sabbath, made no difference. Every day. One was brought in the morning, and the incense was burnt, and the menorah was prepared. One was brought in the evening, well, in the afternoon actually. The incense was burnt again, and the menorah was lit, and that concluded the temple day's service, because the temple did not run at night. Offerings burnt at night, but no one came to visit the temple at night. There was a watch, and there was always a fire, but there was no service or work done in the temple at night. The morning of the 17th of Tammuz of the fourth month, 3 weeks ago, in the year 70 or 69, whatever the day was, the actual instruction was, is the dispute amongst historians, where was that day? The morning lamb was brought, and that was it. The afternoon lamb was never brought. They didn't have one. There were no more lambs, no more sheep, no more animals left in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was under siege. Jerusalem has been under siege since Passover. Jerusalem is starving because the wheat piles were burnt. No one knows by who. There were 3 factions. Could have been any of them. They all pointed fingers at the other one. They all had reason why to burn the wheat piles, to force the other one to surrender, or force the other one to fight, whatever the case may be. Jerusalem is starving for weeks now. And the temple stands in its glory, but the altar is quiet, is calm, is cold. There is no fire on the altar. There is no sacrifices. There are no offerings. There was a short period of exile between the first and second temples, 70 years. And then a Mizbeach was built and the temple was built. There was a short period of 3 years during the rebellion, during the Greek insurgency into the land under the Seleucids, when the time of the Maccabees, when the temple was closed for 3 years. 3 years then the Hasmoneans reopened, rededicated the temple. That's what we have Hanukkah. And offerings were brought again. There was a time of 37 years. 73 years. 70 plus 3, 73 years. Before that, the first temple stood for 410 years. Before that, the tabernacle stood for 490 years. Before that, they were in Egypt. For the better part of 1,400 years straight, and according to some historians, 1,500 years, because the length of the second temple, I'm not so sure whether it was 490, whether it was 540, 550, regardless. For the better part of 1,500 years, the Jews, Israelites before them, or the name before they were called Jews, brought offerings in a tabernacle or a temple. The tabernacle in the wilderness for 40 years, 39 years. The tabernacle in Shiloh. The tabernacle on the move. The tabernacle moving to Jerusalem. And then the tabernacle turned to a temple of solid stone built by Solomon that lasted 410 years. And then another one was built 70 years later, and it lasted, there's a dispute among the rabbis, 420 years, 490 years, 540, 35, 540 years, whatever the exact number is. That's a debate for a different time. But it stood for centuries. So for the better part of 1,400 years, the Israelites, the Jews, have been able to bring offerings. And that stopped 1,955 years ago. That was the last, not today, 3 weeks ago, like I said. That was the last time the altar was used. That was the last time. That was the last time someone could bring an offering according to the 5 books of Moses, according to Leviticus, according to Numbers, to God, and know that it was a pleasing aroma to God. It was God's service. I'm not saying we've abandoned God. I'm not saying we don't service Him anymore. We don't serve Him anymore. We still pray. We still have service in synagogues. But that was the last time we were able to fulfill that commandment of bringing the daily offering after a millennia and a half of doing it. And it's been 1,955 years since we've done it. I spoke before about how we know we're going to get a temple back. How do I know? How do I know? I don't just believe, I know. Because it says in the prophets that foxes are going to walk over the Temple Mount. And some years after the temple's destruction, Rabbi Akiva was walking toward Jerusalem. Jews were not allowed in Jerusalem. I know the Talmud says they were walking to the Temple Mount, but they weren't walking in Jerusalem. They couldn't walk in Jerusalem because for the rest of the life of Rabbi Akiva, the Romans left Jerusalem desolate. No one was allowed to live there. They were so mad at the Jews, so mad at the rebellion. They didn't allow anyone to return to Jerusalem out of fear that they're going to take a stakehold there and start another rebellion. Well, they were wrong. Another rebellion happened anyway. But they went to the north, and if you know the geography, the terrain of Jerusalem, to the north of the Temple Mount is Har Scopus. And he went there, and from Har Scopus, Mount Scopus, he could look and he could see down because it overlooks the Temple Mount. And he was there with other sages, other scholars. And they saw the same thing. They saw that there were foxes running on the Temple Mount. And they cried because they lived to see the Holy Temple. They saw its service. They were able to hear the priests when they blessed Israel. They were able to hear the Levites when they played their music and when they sang their songs. They were able to smell the aroma of the incense. They were able to see the menorahs as they were lit. They would see the gold, the marble, the amazing, beautiful edifice, the curtains and tapestries. They were able to see. They witnessed it. They lived through it. They lived through a time where on the high holidays, one time a year, the holy and the only person, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, was able to utter God's name the way it's pronounced. Not like the witnesses pronounce it. Not like Wesley Huff pronounces it. Not like anyone else, the Christians pronounce it. They don't know. There's no juz and hez and fuzz, was and whatever it is. The way it was written in the ancient Hebrew, the way it was actually pronounced, the Tetragrammaton was pronounced, it was only pronounced one time, well, three times, once a year. And that was when the high priest was praying for atonement for himself, for his household, and for the people of Israel. And you would have the bull offering for him and his household. He would have the goat offering that was for the rest of the people of Israel, the one that was going to be offered. And he would make confession over it. And he would quote the pasuk from the Bible that says that God forgives the people. Sorry. I'm trying to recall the pasuk by heart, the verse by heart, but for some reason I can't remember it. I'm going to look it up. Sorry, it's been a long fast day. My brain is not working as it could. Okay. One sec. Yeah. Muslim custom. Okay, we can turn on the world Muslim service. Here we go. Okay, sorry. I'm going to get to it in 1 second. Okay. Sorry. He would be the high priest would stand in the priestly courtyard, and he would have the bull, but he would make confession for himself and for his household, or the goat when he was making confession for the people, and he would say, "Ki bayom hazeh," as it says in the Torah, "Ki bayom hazeh," for on that day, it's in Leviticus, "L'chaper aleichem," God will atone for you, make expiation for you, "L'tareschem," to purify you, "Mikol chataseichem," from all your sins, "Lifnei Hashem," before God, "Titchatu," sorry, and you will be purified. So again, he would say, "Ki bayom hazeh yechaper aleichem l'tareschem mikol chataseichem lifnei Hashem titaru." Before God, you will be purified, and he would pronounce that name, the name of God, exactly the way it's written. The one time a year. He would do it 3 times, or only 1 day a year. Otherwise, we never, ever, ever pronounce that name. Because of the commandment, never pronounce that name in vain. And the entire assembly would bow. When they hear the name being pronounced, they would bow on their knees and on their foreheads to the ground, spread out, hands spread out. And they would say, "Baruch Shem Kivod Machuso Li'olam Va'ed." Blessed is the name of your holy kingdom forever and ever. Your holy name, your holy kingdom should be blessed forever and ever. 3 times. And these sages heard those words. And now they're with Rabbi Akiva some decades later, and they're visiting Mount Scopus, and they're looking at the destruction of Jerusalem, and they see the temple is gone because the Romans plowed the temple off the Temple Mount. They used catapults and machinery, and they got rid of the temple, and they threw it into the valley below. And they see these foxes running around the Temple Mount. And they cry. These people who saw the temple in its glory, they cry, "What has happened to us? Woe is us! Woe could it be that God is in exile? We are in exile." They were living in Israel. They were still considering themselves in exile because they were living in Israel. Because there was no temple, there was no Jerusalem, there was no sovereignty. And they said, woe is to us. And Rabbi Akiva, ever the optimist, ever the one looking for the good in everything, said, I am happy about this. And they said, how could you be happy when we are so sad? He said, sure, I mourn the temple as you do. But if the prophets say that there's going to be foxes running around the Temple Mount, then I also believe Isaiah and Ezekiel, that when they say there's going to be a temple rebuilt. Now, what was the greatness of Rabbi Akiva? Why did he realize that and the other sages did not realize that? It's a great question. They're sages. They know the verses of Torah also. How could they be said? Wouldn't they come to the same conclusion as Rabbi Akiva? They are also sages. They also know the prophets and writings. What they were missing was this point. Nothing in the prophets or writings talks about a third temple. It never says Bayish Lishi, third temple, third time's a charm. All the prophets talk about is the return of Jews to the land and those exiles returning and God returning and his temple returning, etc., etc. So they thought they already ran out of chances. They had a second temple. They had already returned. They were in exile for 70 years by the Babylonians. They returned. And when they returned, they had their chance. And here we are. The temple destroyed again. Now what? Where's the next prophecy? Where's it going to tell us that there's going to be a third temple? When Rabbi Akiva saw the foxes, he realized the prophecy has not yet been fulfilled. The temple that is enumerated in Ezekiel, the exact dimensions, has not yet been rebuilt. None of the temples looked like that. The glory of God, as it mentions in the prophets, returning did not happen yet. The peace on earth, that swords will be bent into plowshares, that lambs will be with lions, that did not yet happen. When there will be peace on earth and people will stop wars, when there will be stop aggression, when Israel will be in peace, that did not yet happen. He realized that the prophecy has not yet been fulfilled, even though there was a second temple, because ultimately they were prophesying the end of time when there's going to be ultimate peace. That time has not happened yet, because if there are foxes on the Temple Mount, then the prophecies are still happening. They're still being fulfilled. There are still things that are yet to come. Still prophecies that have not been fulfilled. Wink, wink. You know who I'm talking to. That is what the greatness of Rabbi Akiva was at that moment. That was his idea. That was what comforted the other sages. They thought they had their chance already. They knew the prophets. They knew the writing. They knew what it said. But they thought they had their chance because the second temple had been built. So it wasn't exactly the prophet said it. It was a little bit this, a little bit that. But basically, the basics of prophecy is not meant to be taken literally. It's meant to be understood after the fact. Once you look back and say, "Oh, that's what the prophet meant," so they're not really sure. Rabbi Akiva assured them, "Don't worry. It has not come to fruition yet." The prophet Jeremiah, the prophet Ezekiel, the prophet Isaiah, things are still happening. Things are still going to happen based on what they talked about, things that based on what they said. We have not reached the end yet, and they were comforted. And that's why Rabbi Akiva was so much involved in the rebellion that happened in 117, where the Talmud refers to it as his students dying because of lack of honor, which could be nothing further from the truth. There's no way that a person who said the main tenet of Torah is love thy neighbor like yourself would have 24,000 students and every single one of them would forget to love thy neighbor like yourself, to forget to give honor to each other. It was a hint in the Talmud to the war between the Romans. The Romans, when the Talmud was being written, still had Roman oversight. They had to write it in a hint manner to make sure that it got by the Roman censors. 24,000 Jews were killed in that rebellion in 117 to 118. And then there was the Bar Kokhba rebellion in 132. He saw it all, Akiva. He lived between both. He like I had an old man, tortured terribly in Caesarea, in the stadium in Caesarea. People go visit the stadium in Caesarea, the amphitheater there, and they like to sit in the steps and say, "Wow, look at all the shows they must have had over there." Knowing on that stage, Rabbi Akiva was tortured to death with Shema Yisrael on his lips. He's the one who gives us comfort after we say, finish Kinnis, and we're finishing the day of Tisha B'Av. About an hour or so left in the Eastern time zone. I think the fast is over about an hour in the Eastern time zone, and then a little bit later, as you go to Central Mountain Time in LA, it's already over in Israel, a long time already. But we reflect once a year on the temple and how we live life without the temple. So I imagine myself living on that eve, on that 9th of Av. The war's been going on since Passover. The temple has ended service 3 weeks ago. The walls of Jerusalem was breached for the final time on the 17th. And now the Romans have breached a second wall, and they got into the main parts of Jerusalem where people live. Jerusalem was split into 3 parts: south, middle, and north. The Romans came from the north because of the geography. There were 3 massive towers that protected the west of Jerusalem. It was very hard to destroy the western wall. We'll get to that in a second about the western wall of Jerusalem. If you have a chance to pull up in the old map of ancient Jerusalem, you'll see the Jerusalem of Herod. You'll see there were 3 massive towers there. There was one to the north, so it was very hard to come from the west, northwest, far from the west. When you got to the south part of Jerusalem, there was the Hinnom Valley, known as Gay Hinnom Valley, and that was the name of the bad place. Mothers would scare the children, saying, "If you don't behave, you go to Gehenna." That became the name of the place that the rabbis wanted to talk about when the soul gets cleansed, purgatory, where it gets cleansed before it goes to sit on the throne of God. So they named that place Gehenna, after the Gehenna, after that valley, the valley of Hinnom in the south of Jerusalem. The valley's still there, though Jerusalem is built up into the valley, so it's no longer scary. You still can visit the valley. You still can visit it. It's it's still steep and stuff, but it's next to the city of David, a little south of the city of David, but to the south part of Jerusalem. But it's all built up. It's hard to really see exactly how steep and how sheer that cliff was, but it was a very, very sheer, steep cliff at that time. And on the other side was the Kidron Valley. That was the valley between Jerusalem and Mount of Olives and Mount Scopus. So you couldn't really attack from there because you was uphill. You got to climb up the mountain and attack a wall that was 80 feet tall. So that was very difficult. The safest bet was A, a siege, and B, to come from the north, the northeast. That's where they came from. They came from the northeast, the most vulnerable part of the wall. Now, there were towers there to protect the wall, but that was the most vulnerable part. That was where it was flat. That was where they could actually have siege equipment. That was where they could actually attack the walls. And the north part of Jerusalem was the Greek quarter, because the Romans and the Greeks lived there for the most part. Most part was Gentiles who lived there before the Jews kicked them all out in their rebellion and took sovereignty back from the Romans and kicked Herod Agrippa out and took over sovereignty of Jerusalem, of the whole entire Judea. So they breached that part, and they were fighting building to building, street to street, until they got to the second part, which is right next to that temple. The temple behind me, you see, right next to it, to the west, was also a valley, but all along the valley were marketplaces. Then up that valley was houses. These days, when you go to the old city in Jerusalem, when you go to the shops. There are shops, and then there's a huge staircase to go down to the Temple Plaza, to the Temple Mount, to the Kotel Plaza. That's where Jerusalem. That's where Zion. That was Zion. That was where the Jews lived on that slope, where the shops are now, and then the big staircase going down to the Kotel Plaza, where the Yeshiva Kotel is. All that place, all along there, that's where the Jews lived there, and then going west, they also lived in the Ir David. There's built up Ir David. There's also a lot of excavations going on in Ir David. So they lived doing the excavations going at the time. There were houses at the time. That's where they lived. They lived there in the south. If you go to the Shalom Pool in the city of David, that was the southernmost part of the old city of Jerusalem, of the original city Jerusalem back then, of the time of Herod, the time of the destruction. And it went all the way north, somewhere past the wall, about I don't know, about a half a mile past where the walls are of the old city now in the north. The old city now to the north is much smaller than the extended Jerusalem back then. To the west, it went to Jaffa Gate. So Jaffa Gate was the western border. So if you go to Jaffa Gate, that was the west part of the old city of Jerusalem, and it went to Temple Mount. That's basically the dimensions of Jerusalem back then, whole housing 40,000 people comfortably, and then 600,000 people not comfortably during the siege. Anyway, so there I am. There we are, 9th of Av, 1955 years ago, on the Temple Mount. About 4 or 5 weeks ago, they breached the walls of Jerusalem, and then we fought them back, and we kicked them back out of Jerusalem, and we rebuilt part of the wall. Then they breached again, and now they're at the second wall, and there's the Antonia Fortress, and they breached the walls of Antonia Fortress. They take over the Antonia Fortress about a couple days ago, and now the Romans are basically at the Antonia Fortress, which sits right at the north part of the Temple Mount, and they're at the second wall, which is where the Kotel Plaza is. That's where they are. They are both. They're sandwiched in there, and they obviously are going through the rest of Jerusalem to the south, to the west, slaughtering any Jerusalemite that resists, taking the rest of them captives, letting those who are starving just wither away and die. And here we are on the Temple Mount now, because that's the last refuge. There's two armies. There's the Ben Gishkala army, which were those who were camped out on the Temple Mount the entire time, and the Ben Gura army. Sorry, there's Yochanan Gishkala, not Ben Gishkala. Yochanan Gishkala, and then there's Yonah Ben Gura, who was the leader of the other army, who's to the west, who was in the Fazayel, that huge tower in the west part of Jerusalem. And now the armies are basically together because the rest of Jerusalem is basically conquered. The only thing left to conquer now is Temple Mount. And last night, there was a daring raid into the Temple Mount because we heard that Titus was there, Titus the general of the Roman army. He's the son of Vespasian, who was the new emperor. Vespasian came 4 years ago to make a siege in Jerusalem, but then he left with the War of the Emperors, and he eventually became emperor. And after that, we had 2.5 years of peace, where there was sovereignty again in Jerusalem, in the entire Judea. And then now, once again, Titus came, and he came Passover time, and he's, again, sieging Jerusalem since then. And we had a daring escape into the Antonia Fortress, and we tried to kill Titus, but unfortunately he woke up, and he was alerted before we got to him. The Jews got to him, and he repelled everyone back on the Temple Mount. So now we're on the Temple Mount. Okay, so okay, 1 second. You really feel like you can't hold that for 1 more hour? What's going on?
I don't know if I woke up and really hot.
Okay, why don't you try to sit and relax and cool off a little? Put water in your face.
There's not much to do, like small stuff.
Yeah. Aye. Someone is not feeling well fasting. It's not an easy fast. It's an important fast, not an easy fast. Not that much left to go. If you can't make it, then obviously break a fast, because like it says in Leviticus, we live by the laws. We don't try to kill ourselves, other laws, and especially something like a custom like fasting on Tisha B'Av. If you're not feeling well, break your fast. Clearly. Anyway, so where are we? So yes, so we are on the Temple Mount, and we had a failed attempt at Titus's life in the Antonia Fortress, and he repelled us back to the Temple Mount. Now it's the morning of the 9th, and the Romans are sitting in the temple, and they're shooting down missiles and stuff onto, missiles meaning projectiles, onto the Temple Mount, and they're shooting catapults, fire onto the Temple Mount, and they're coming up from the other entrances, from the western entrances. They're coming up there also. They're trying to come up what we know as Warren's Gate and other gates that would lead into the Temple Mount from the bridge. The bridge that went across Jerusalem, they led into the Temple Mount. They're coming from there. We're fighting in all sides. But now we see it. They're coming down. They're jumping down from the Antonia Fortress onto the portico. Surrounding the Temple Mount on three sides was a portico. The portico was this sort of like a colonnade that was a whole bunch of columns, and it was covered. It was a covered walkway, and underneath that, people used to learn, people used to teach classes, people used to relax and rest when they were visiting temple. Anyways, this beautiful portico that was on three sides: north, east, and south. And they're coming down, they're jumping down onto the part that's in the north, because coming off the Antonia Fortress. So, which Herod, of course, named after Mark Antony. He named the fortress after Mark Antony. That's when Antonia Fortress got his name. Herod was a huge fan of Rome, a huge patron of Rome. There's so many things he named after Roman things, like for instance, Caesarea after Caesar. The place Caesarea in the west side of Israel. He named that after Caesar. The Tiberias River was named after Tiberian, also another Roman general, etc., etc. Anyway, so they're coming off the Antonia Fortress and then jumping down. So what the Judeans do is they burn the portico roof. They figure, let's burn the roof, let's get rid of the roof. And therefore, it's way too high for them to jump down. It's a shorter jump to get onto the roof, but from the roof down, it's an additional 10 feet. So to jump that long, that they're not going to do. So they burn the roofs. So the Jews are the ones who start the fire. You know how in the Matrix they say, we don't know who started the fight, but we're the ones who scorched the sky? Well, we don't know who started the fight, but actually we do. But we're the ones who burnt the portico roof of the north side. And anyway, it catches on fire. And it spreads throughout the rest of the portico, and the rest of the portico starts burning down. And there's a lot of chaos going on. Finally, they get ladders, the Romans do, and they start climbing down to the Antonia Fortress. They breach the gates onto the Temple Mount from the west. And the last bit of the army goes into the hotel, which is in the southern side, and they run into the small Sanhedrin building, and everyone else runs into the temple. The temple itself is an amazing structure. If you look at it behind me, it's surrounded by walls, surrounded by towers. In itself is built like a fortress. So the big gates are closed, and that's it. But for the rest of the day, they're trying to break down the walls of the temple, trying to break down the doors of the temple, trying to throw catapults into the temple. And that's it. They finally breach toward the end of the day, the afternoon, as sun is going down on the 9th of Av, 1955 years ago. They breached the walls of the temple, and they slaughter everyone inside. And Titus comes, and he walks into the temple. He looks up, he sees the amazing, unbelievable, these huge gold doors that opened in the middle of the temple between the courtyard of the Israelites and the courtyards of the priests. And they opened the doors, the huge doors, 20, 30 feet high, made of solid gold, ornamental, beautiful. The doors of Nicanor's doors. And they open them up, and he walks in and he looks up, and he sees this massive, massive sanctuary made of gold, beautiful gold, blue and white. That when you walk, it looks like the waves of the ocean are going are going on the walls. The way the light reflects off it, it looks like the ocean with waves, and these huge pillars that are embossed on the wall with topped with gold, and then a huge crown over 100 feet high in the sky. First of all, the door is between 60 and 80 feet. The entrance, it's hard to see, but the door right behind me, right here. There's the top of the door of the sanctuary. Went all the way to the top of the door of the sanctuary. That went about 60 to 80 feet high. The rest of it reached over 100 feet in the air, with the beautiful golden spikes as making a crown on top. He looked at this massive, unbelievably gorgeous building that dominated the skyline of Jerusalem that only he saw from afar until now. And now he's looking up and he sees the awe of God right on him. He takes a sword and he stabbed the curtain. The curtain was on this door, a red curtain, ornamented, beautifully stitched, embroidered with the beautiful embroidery of lions and eagles and other things. He stabs it and he rips it. And according to the Talmud, and according to legend, the lore, blood starts coming out of the curtains to symbolize like you defeated God. But in any event, he tore this curtain in two, and then, as a man who conquers does, he had his whore come and he showed God who's manly right there in front of the sanctuary, in front of the place where God resided, in front of the place where the priests would light the menorah, would burn the incense, would do the service, the service on Yom Kippur on the inside, bringing the coals and the ashes before the Ark of the Covenant. Although the Second Temple didn't have the Ark of the Covenant, but anyway, the place where it would be, the place where the huge cherubs, the two 20-foot tall cherubs were standing. That's where he decided he stabbed the curtains and he showed how manly he was with his woman. And that was it. That was the end. The Romans they set ablaze anything could be set ablaze. All the curtains, any wood, furniture, anything that was wood planking. There was not a lot of it, but there was some of it. There was a whole chamber that was full of wood because they used that for the altar. They set that room on fire, that room ablaze. They found where the priests sleep. They burnt all their garments. They burnt all their belongings. And they burnt, obviously, the wood of the portico. So there we go. The temple wall was made of stone and gold and marble. There was plenty still for them to burn. They burnt it, and it burnt all evening. And that evening and the next morning, they rounded up the Judeans that were left in Jerusalem, those that weren't starved to death, even those that were half starved to death. They rounded up every single person, and they brought him, and they shackled them, and they marched them out. Anyone who couldn't walk, they killed. Anyone who was able to get onto their feet, they did a march. They marched them outside of Jerusalem, and they marched them toward Caesarea. 97,000 Jews were taken as slaves after the destruction of Jerusalem, after the sacking of the temple. Besides the fact that Titus was so afraid that there was going to be another rebellion that he destroyed the temple, he had it torn down and thrown into the valley below. That was the sacking of Jerusalem, and that's what happened as the day of Tisha B'Av goes out. This was the worst of it. I know we sit on the floor in the morning, and we don't eat or drink the whole time, and we don't wash the whole time, and we say our kinnis in the morning, and we don't put on even our talis tefillin on in the morning, our phylacteries, our tefillin, we don't put on our fringes, we don't put on our prayer shawls, our talis in the morning. We do so in the afternoon, and we can sit in a regular chair in the afternoon, but we sit on the floor in the morning. Still, the main crux of the destruction actually happened now, and then the people were taken as hostages, as slaves, not hostages, they were taken as slaves. And they were brought back to Rome, and they were paraded They were able to catch John Gishkala. They caught John Gishkala. They eventually caught Ben Giora, and they paraded them in Rome. They made a huge parade, the Arc de Triomphe in Rome, and the one that copies it in Paris. They show the Romans marching out with banners and with the bread, the table bread, the bread that held the 12 pieces of bread, and the different lanterns they had, the different menorahs they had. There was one dumb menorah, but then there's a lot of other smaller menorahs that's shown in that picture as they sacked and they took the spoils of the tabernacle of the temple back to Rome, and they used the gold from the crown of the temple and from the capitals and the gold that adorned the doors and all the money that was given to the temple by the people for offerings, everything else the temple had, all the riches the temple had, and they didn't burn, that they brought back with them to Rome, and they funded the building of the Colosseum. So if you ever go to Rome and you build the Colosseum and you admire, wow, what a magnificent building this was, know that it was funded by the sacking of Jerusalem. Completely funded by the sacking of Jerusalem. And they paraded these slaves down. They used these slaves, and that was the but there were still Jews that lived in the south of Judea. There were still the Essenes who were living in Qumran. There were still other Jews who were living. They went to the south of Judea, to Beitar, to Bethlehem, to Hebron, to other cities in the south and villages in the south of Judea. And that's it. We've never really left. I mean, there's been Jews since then. In other words, we never left. We were kicked out of Jerusalem, but we returned to Jerusalem when we were allowed to go back to Jerusalem in the 3rd century. And the Armenians came, and then a bit later on, the Arabs came, and later on, the Christians came. But we returned. We were there. We were there since then. So we were a defeated people, and our temple's been destroyed, and our city has been obliterated, and our beauty has been taken from us. But we have still been there. And we've always pined to go back. Those 97,000 that were taken as slaves, they pined to return. Their children pined to return, even as they were moved into Europe. The Jews that were living in Babylon, a lot of them came after that. They came to Judea. And even those who weren't able to come, they still pined to return. So we still celebrate, not celebrate, but we still have our Tisha B'Av. We still do the service of Tisha B'Av. Because, thank you so much for the easy fast wishes, I appreciate that. Although mine's almost over in about 40 minutes, so that's good. But we still have Tisha B'Av. We still, every single day in our prayers, 3 times a day, want Jerusalem to be rebuilt. Jerusalem is not the Jerusalem that was. It's a Jerusalem. It's a semblance of a Jerusalem. The problem is, without Torah sovereignty in the land, and without control of the Temple Mount and a temple to God there, we feel like we're still in exile. There's still the holy presence, the Shekhinah, the divine presence of God, His presence that dwelt amongst the people in His temples and the tabernacle. That has not been rectified. Peace has not been rectified. Sovereignty over Israel, according to the Torah, has not been rectified. So for that we wait. And for that we hope that our actions will make it happen. We try to make it happen by moving to Israel, by supporting Israel, and supporting the people there. We try to make it happen by loving one another, by following what Rabbi Kiva said, as it says in the Torah. V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. We love your neighbor like yourself. We try to make it there by having peace, shalom, being ish l'reihu, between a man and his fellow. We try to follow the 10 utterances. We try to follow the other 609 commandments in 609, no, 600, no, I can't, sorry, 599 other commandments. There are 14 commandments in the 10 commandments, the 10 utterances. So the 599 commandments, the ones that we could fulfill, obviously we can't fulfill a lot of them. We can't do a lot of the priestly stuff. We can't do the temple stuff. We can't do the certain things we can't do. Yovel we no longer have, the Jubilee year, but we try to do what we can. And we try to bring peace on this world. We try to do good in the world. You know, the interesting thing is that really all Jews want is to be left alone and do their thing. Just live in peace, teach our children, engage in commerce, and thrive. And that's it. Innovate. We're innovative writers. We're innovative in science. We're innovative in mathematics. It's a lot that Jews give to the world. If the world would let us. And stop making us a scapegoat. Now, I know that, we don't have a monopoly on the depravity of the human condition. The depravity of the human condition is not monopolized by the Jews. What's going on in Sudan, in Congo, in Syria, in Yemen, in India, in China, in Russia, Ukraine, around the world, on and on and on. Now this new war that just started in Cambodia. Clearly, it's not unique or only Jews. But I will say that if you leave Jews alone, two things will happen. The good thing will happen is that Jews will be producers. They will give to the world. We will make the world a better place. The second thing will happen is that a lot of us will assimilate. The funny thing is that the more you bother us, the more we thrive. So in a way, exile has been good to us, helping us thrive, keeping us straight on the straight and narrow. Because the times where we've been left alone, left to our own vices, we lose a lot because we assimilate and we intermarry and we stop, and people feel so comfortable, they feel like they don't have to keep the Torah anymore, they don't keep traditions, and next thing you know is you don't know who's Jewish and who's not. But there's nothing really you can do about it, you meaning the world in general, because as it says in Deuteronomy 4, as we've read in the Torah today, on this day, God will keep us, and He will keep us small, and He'll keep us light in number, but He will keep us. And He will return to us, and we will return to Him. And with all our heart and all our minds and all souls, we will return to Him, and He will return to us, and we will be redeemed. So no matter what really you do, whether you leave us alone or persecute us, the end result's ultimately really going to be the same. It'll be easier for us if you left us alone. We'll be better, easier living, better to make bread, better to grow our families, better to add to the world. But if you don't, we'll still be here. We'll always be here. They said Israel will be destroyed in 1948. They said Israel will be destroyed in the 1950s. The Sinai campaign, they said Israel will be destroyed in 1967. They said Israel will be destroyed in the 1970s during the Kippur War. They said Israel will be destroyed in the 1980s when the first Intifada started. They said Israel will be destroyed in the 2000s when the second Intifada started. They said giving up Gaza will destroy Israel. They said not making peace will destroy Israel. They said Oslo Accords will destroy Israel. Every time the Jews want to give up more and more land for peace, they said that will destroy Israel. They said 2023 will destroy Israel. Israel is still here. Israel will still be here. The Jewish people were not destroyed by the Babylonians. We weren't destroyed by the Assyrians. We weren't destroyed by the Romans. We weren't destroyed by the Seleucids. Slavery did not destroy us. Destroying our temple did not destroy us. The pogroms that resulted from the Crusades did not destroy us. Burning all our books, 24 cartloads full of books, of handwritten parchments, manuscripts, did not destroy us, nor did it make us lose our faith. Spreading us out to Africa, kicking us out of Spain, expelling us from France, expelling us from England, moving us out of Germany into Poland, from Poland back into Germany, moving us into Russia, out of Russia, in Hungary, and out of Hungary, into Austria, out of Austria, blood libels, more pogroms, Holocaust inquisitions, hunting us throughout the world, shooting up synagogues. We are still here. And as the day ends, I look back at all the tragedies that have happened. But as the great song says, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. It's actually from the Torah also. It was taken out of the Torah also, that says that the hardships only make you stronger, make you like iron, make you like brass, make you like silver. Well, not make iron and brass because those are hard, not like silver and gold, which are malleable, which are soft. The Jewish people have been made hard and we're resilient. And we know that God is on our side. We see God. Like I said, my grandparents left the Holocaust and they still saw God. They didn't leave the faith. Rabbi Shimon Schwab left the Holocaust and he wrote a kinnah, but he didn't leave the faith. Jews in America were fired every single Friday because they wouldn't work on Sabbath. Are you coming in on Saturday? No, then you're fired. And they had to get a new job on Sunday. And they were fired again. As Friday ended, coming on Sabbath? Nope, then you're fired. We survived signs that said Jews and dogs are not allowed. We survived Jews need not apply. We have survived the ghettos that you put us in for hundreds of years in Europe, ghettos that were and second-class citizens that the caliphates kept us under. We survived the wrath of the caliphates as they persecuted Jews in the East, and we survived the wrath of the popes and the Christians in the West. Now there's only one thing left we have to survive. We have to survive ourselves. Sinas chinam, frivolous, gratuitous hatred is what destroyed the temple. Now, it wasn't necessarily hating each other because, for the most part, there were two factions. There were the Sadducees and the Pharisees, one a little more conservative, one a little more liberal, so what? For the most part, they got along. All this lies about the Pharisees hating the Sadducees, that's Christian invention. It's not anywhere in our books. Everything that the Talmud says about the Sadducees is only because they wanted to bring Christians back to the faith. So they harped on a sect of Judaism that was no longer existent to try to show why Jews who were enticed by Christianity, because Christianity was started by Jews, why should they come back to the faith? But in the Temple era, the Christians and the Sadducees and the Pharisees, they got along. They were in the Sanhedrin. They sat in the Sanhedrin together. They ruled Judea together. They ruled Jerusalem together for the 4 years when it was free from the sieges of Rome. They were fine. What was the hatred? The hatred was that when it came time, push came to shove, and it came time to fight the Romans or deal with the Romans, that they couldn't get along. And it wasn't the Pharisees and Sadducees. It was Gishgala, the priests on the Temple Mount. It was Ben-Gurion with the regular masses in southern part of Jerusalem. It was those who wanted to make peace, the Pharisee sages who didn't want any part of the war, not this one, not that one, who just wanted to make peace. It was the zealots, the Bar Yonim, the Sicarii, who wanted to just attack and use any tactic necessary to attack and harm the Romans. And unfortunately, they used it amongst themselves. If you didn't agree with us, then we kill you. Unless you agree with us, we kill you. So basically, then you had factions fighting amongst themselves. Now you had Ben-Gurion not getting supplies from Gishgala. You had Gishgala upset that Ben-Gurion were giving them weapons. You had the peace ones upset at the army for trying to fight. You had the zealots who were now attacking both sides because they weren't fighting enough. That's what destroyed the temple. Because when groups fight with each other, that's when it hurts. And these days, That's exactly, unfortunately, what Jews have. I don't want to make it public consumption. Hamevin Yavin. But we have factions in Judaism. I'm not going to call it any faction in particular. I'm just going to say we have factions. Eastern European Kabbalists versus Western and Southern European purists. We have the only way to Torah is through Kabbalah. We have the only way to the Torah is through Pshat. Then we are the original Masorah because we were undisturbed under the Muslim Caliphate. We are the original. We know Torah because we have the great rabbis in Germany. We have new age Hasidic movements, more traditional Hasidic movements. Hasidic movements altogether is a new thing. I don't want to get into particulars. I'm not getting particulars. It's not for public consumption. Not at all. Everyone has their merits, and everyone has the reasons why they should get along. But someone said it best. I don't know who said it, but it went around. If the Messiah would come today, if the Messiah would come, and the records would show he's the Messiah, and everyone agrees that he's the Messiah, everyone agrees. They trace his lineage straight back to David, or trace his lineage straight back to Ephraim. Right? Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben David, whatever it is. He came today. And they trace his lineage, they know. They know for certain this guy is the anointed. He's going to be anointed. Elijah comes and anoints him. Elijah returns from heaven, where he went in a chariot of fire. He comes down and he proclaims, behold, this man, this guy named Menachem, named Emmanuel, named David, named Isaiah, whatever you want to possibly say what his name is. Maybe his name is Baruch. Maybe his name is Baruch. Maybe his name is Shlemiel. It would make sense that the anointed would be a Shlemiel. Well, there we go. The Shlemiel is the Mashiach. Who couldn't see that coming from the Yiddish, vaudeville stage? That would be like perfect. The Shlemiel is the Mashiach, of course. Anyway, so Mr. Shlemiel is the Mashiach, and Eliyahu comes down, and he proclaims him, and he anoints him. Here is a jug of oil that was been protected underneath the Temple Mount for all this time. It has the high priest seal in it from way back when, from the first temple era. We know this is pure oil. This is the oil, that's going to anoint. Here we pop the seal. Whoa, the seal's popped. Oh my gosh, whoa, this is real this time. And he anoints this man, Shlemiel, and now Shlemiel is the anointed. He is the anointed. And all the prophecies seem like they're coming true. And all Jews come and all news agencies are focusing on this guy, and they're all looking to see exactly what he's going to do. And he goes to the Kotel. Is he going to pray by the Kotel? And he makes his way up to the Temple Mount. Whoa! He believes you let it go to the Temple Mount. Yeah, of course he could. He could do it. Even though, many people believe you can't go to Temple Mount because you're not really sure where the temple was, and you can't go in the state of impurity, but he went to the mikvah, and he can go. He's pure. He's the anointed. He'll go. Yeah, he goes up to the Temple Mount, and he stands there on the Temple Mount in the southern part, facing the huge dome of the rock, or got rid of them, whatever it is, facing there, and he's going to say, okay, now what's he going to do? He said, okay, the first thing I do as the Messiah is we're going to pray the afternoon services. Yeah, great, wow, yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, let's pray. As an entire nation, let's pray. Religious, not religious, reformed, conservative, it doesn't make a difference, Orthodox, let's get the Messiah's here, we're going to pray the afternoon services, and then he's going to tell us exactly what's going to happen next. We're all excited, we're thrilled, we're pumped. And then chaos. Because what does he pray? Nusach Ashkenaz, Nusach Sfard, Nusach Ashkenaz Movuk, Nusach Mizrahi. Eidos Mizrahi, Real Svard. What about Nusachari? Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Now there's a problem. Also, how does he dress? Is he going to put on a fedora? Is he going to put on a shtreimel? Does he just put on a yarmulke? Big yarmulke, small yarmulke, no yarmulke, turban, fez. Uh-oh. We have a problem. Houston, I think we have a problem. That's our last hurdle. So don't look so much. As I close, and we end this day, I will leave you with this. Don't look so much at what the world is doing to us. Because what the world does to Jews is really irrelevant. Whether they're nice to Jews, whether they're horrible to Jews, whether there's pogroms, whether there's peace, whether there's prosperity, whether Jews get into government, whether Jews are restrained into lower part of society and into ghettos, regardless of what they do. Jewish people will survive. We will survive. We have survived. We will survive. We will continue to survive. We'll just keep doing it because that's what we do. That's what we do, boy. We survive. We're survivors. So don't worry so much about what the Gentiles are doing to us. Don't worry about an uptick in anti-Semitism. Don't worry about an uptick in hatred online. Don't worry about an uptick in violence. Listen, obviously you can be nervous and want for your safety. But as far as our survival, don't worry about it. We will continue to survive. As long as there's a Rabbi Morty's out there, we will continue. As long as there's great people out there, like Rabbi Usher, like Bernie, like our good friend Salah and Ash and Yaakov and all the good people and Lewis Canderson and Max and all, as long as there's all these good people out there, we will always survive. So don't worry about what the outside world, what the non-Jews are doing to Jews as far as the survival. If we really want to bring the ultimate redemption, and yes, moving to Israel would be a nice idea for those who could do it. Supporting Israel could be a nice idea. These are nice ideas. You want to know a great idea? A real idea that will really work? Is let's work on community integration. If we could make a community integrate. Now, one person can't do it. I'm not saying go out there and grab a husband and tell him that he has to, daven and not shul from now on. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that let's look at each other, not as types of Jews, but as Jews. So he dresses differently. That's no different than wearing a different color t-shirt, or a different color button-down shirt, or a different style jacket. So what? He wears a different hat. He wears a different jacket. He doesn't wear a hat. He doesn't wear a jacket. So what? This one was raised conservative, so they don't follow everything that you follow. So what? This one's reform, so they're based or traditional. Okay. And a Jew is a Jew. This one is secular and is not teaching a kid's tradition. You could tell him maybe it's a good idea to teach a kid's tradition, but it shouldn't make you dislike the person. They believe in things that I don't believe in. Okay. But we all believe in one thing, right? At the end of the day, we all believe in God. Even the secular Jew, even the atheist Jew. Atheist Jew is oxymoron. Maybe an agnostic. But you put him in a situation where he's in the Tzahal and October 7th happens again, this guy's praying to God. Okay? Everyone prays to God when they need God. You want to forget God because you think life is good, fine. Or you're throwing a tantrum because life is not good, and therefore, what do I need God for? That's your problem. But deep down, you know it's what. A book doesn't write itself. A world doesn't create itself. A computer doesn't build itself. A podcast doesn't happen by itself, even with AI. AI doesn't happen by itself. So we are all look at each other as Jews. I don't care how you dress. If you don't dress the way my community dresses, I don't care if you don't talk the way my community talks. You don't know Hebrew, or do you know Hebrew? You say oi instead of oh. You say ah instead of You say he instead of he. You say ah instead of ah. You say ah instead of ah. Sa, tha, fa, whatever you want, whatever it is. It makes no difference. You daven completely different. You say Baruch Shemay. You say different tefillot. You say different things. Okay, that's your problem. But between me and you are a Jew and I am a Jew, and you are a Jew and I am a Jew. Just look at each other as Jews. Forget the external. If you want to tell Lubavitch stop going out there and making a Yishchal Hashem with their circus, you could try. You want to tell Ms. Nagdim to get over themselves and the fact that you're doing a great job by going out there and putting toll on every single person you could see? Sure, you could believe that. But at least look at each other as Jews. Understand that we are fellow Jews. There is someone on social media, a well-known person, a rabbi, at least he calls himself a rabbi, and I wrote to him, and I had some comments, and I said, listen, I'm also a rabbi from a different upbringing and a different way of customs, and I would very much like to, discuss what certain things you do and understand it more. And maybe I have a wrong perspective because I'm looking at certain things you do as incorrect, and I want to understand it because maybe I can get an understanding, and maybe we could have as a meeting of the minds. I don't want to convert him to what I do necessarily. I don't think I'm going to. I think he's entrenched in his customs and beliefs, but I figured let's leave open the dialogue, sort of like a Jew and a Christian when I open dialogue with Christians or Messianics all the time. They're not going to bring me over to their side. I'm probably not going to make Jews out of them. I just want to have an exchange of ideas to understand what's what, so we understand each other. If we understand where each other's coming from, even if we disagree, then there's peace. Peace comes from understanding. When there is confusion, that's when there is not peace. I think it's either in the Torah, but it's definitely in the Talmud, that confusion leads to dissension. But when you have peace of mind, that's when you have peace in everything else in your life. When you have understanding, when you understand something, when it's not confused, the reason why, again, people hate people they don't know is because they don't understand them. They look like a minority because they don't understand, and they have different traditions and customs. They look differently and they act differently, and therefore I don't understand it, and therefore hate. That's usually how human emotions work. But if we can look at each other and say, at least let's get an understanding of each other. Of course, this guy ignored me and he deleted my message and never responded and never heard from him again. Okay, I moved past it. It's just an example. I'm not interested in reaching out to him again. And if we ever cross paths, that'll be great. If not, that also is great. But at least look at each other as at the very least, as human beings, people who have legitimacy, people who have authenticity in their character. Look at each other that way, and we will be able then to ultimately bring peace. And when that Messiah comes, and he starts doing a nusach that we're not familiar with, we can at least say, hey, you know what? I have friends who pray that way, and by darn it, that way was right. And apparently my ancestors took a left turn somewhere, but this is the right way now. Let's all get that sitter and let's all pray the same way instead of automatic confusion and shun. If we get into ourselves in a mindset of understanding each other, of giving each other the benefit of the doubt, loving each other as you like to love yourself, you always give yourself the benefit. Whenever do we not give ourselves the benefit of the doubt? We're always right. In every argument, we are right. We are always right in our relationships. We're always right. If I concede, it's only because I want the relationship to work. In my marriage, I tell my wife she's right because I want the relationship to work. But in my mind, I know I'm the right one. That's how we all are, and vice versa. We always give ourselves the benefit of the doubt. We're always correct. We always made the right turn. Now we make the wrong turn. Oh, there's a reason why, some external factor, not our fault, right? That's sort of how human beings are. If we would give each other the same benefit of the doubt and say, you know what, he also is almost only human, right? Another Matrix reference, only human. right? Matrix, the second matrix. He also is only human. He also is trying his best. She also is doing what she can. Yes, she doesn't dress like I want her to dress or my community dresses. As a matter of fact, I know she was brought up better than that, and now she decided to dress. So what? It's not the be-all, end-all. We could still look at each other and still have that same understanding of each other and the same respect for one another. And understand, even though you're different and you practice different, and I may think what you practice is incorrect or could be modified, I understand you as a person. At least I know where you're coming from. You're trying. You're human. You're trying. And what you're doing is what's good for you. And that's fine. And I accept it. I disagree with your actions, but I accept you as a person. And that, I think, is really what we have to focus on. So if I could have anyone who's listening out there, at least try with one person to do this. One person you don't get along with so well, or one type of person you don't get along with so well, or the next person you may feel an instinct not to get along with so well. I'm not asking you to be best friends. But look at that person and say, you know what? That person is trying. That person's human. That person is doing the best he can for himself, or she can for herself. And therefore, kol hakavod, move on. I think that will go a long way in mending ties. I am a good. I'm not going to say I'm a friend of Tovia Singer's, but I'm becoming a colleague of Tovia Singer. Rabbi Tovia Singer, and me, and I, Rabbi Tovia Singer, and I, God willing, will be putting on a podcast together, a joint podcast. We will be discussing various topics at the end of. Hopefully, we can arrange it. Not arrange yet, but hopefully, arrange the end of August. Spoiler. So me and Rabbi Tovia Singer will be doing a joint podcast together sometime, hopefully the end of August. I'm doing a debate with Dr. Michael Brown, a Jewish convert to Christianity. I'll be debating him on August 28th. Hopefully, it'll be a friendly debate, 8 p.m. August 28th. That's a Thursday night coming up. So me and him will be debating. A person who's been a Christian for several decades. He was raised a secular Jew, and now he's a Christian. So I'll be debating him on topic. The topic we'll be debating is Jesus the one and only Messiah? You know, there's a million things that we could debate, but I think it's good to focus. So August 28th, Thursday at 8 p.m., we'll be debating Dr. Michael Brown. Hopefully, we'll be live. We'll be on YouTube. We'll be on TikTok. Hopefully, we'll arrange that. That's set up. We're gonna arrange the particulars soon, but that's set up. And again, I would like to do a podcast, not a debate. A podcast, me and Rabbi Singer discussing prophecy, discussing the writings, etc. Different various Jewish topics. We're going to be doing that. Talk soon. Bernie, Morty, why? Why with Dr. Brown or why with Tovia Singer? I'm not sure. And I'll tell you the reason. I'll answer both. The reason with Rabbi Singer is because I think he has a lot to offer, and I have a lot to offer, and I think we could give our perspectives on Judaism, prophecy, the prophets, and to the world out there. And as far as Dr. Brown, it was actually set up by somebody, a friend of mine, a evangelist friend of mine who wanted this debate because they found it to be helpful if the ideas were put out there instead of constantly having to deal with why don't you read Isaiah 53 or why don't you read Isaiah 7:9 or or Isaiah 9:6 or whatever it is. We could go ahead and hash it out. It's not going to be it should not be a brawl. It's going to be moderated. Each one's going to have a chance to have an opening statement and then take questions and have a closing statement. It's going to be very civil, hopefully, very professional, very tasteful, and it's going to be good. Hopefully, he'll get his point of view out there. I'll get my point of view and destroy him out there. Just kidding, out there, and that's why. And because also, I think as far as my own career, I think it's good if I start getting more guests, getting some debates out there with Messianic, so to speak. My idea is to try to convert Jews back to Judaism. And also, I want to get other, like-minded or not like-minded guests on my little podcast here, my little lives, my joint YouTube and TikTok lives, so I could build up my brand, build up my own scholarship, and help the cause. So that's why, and yeah, that's my PR. So anyone's listening out there, I do thank you. I know it's not easy on a Tisha B'Av to listen. I do thank all those pro-pallies for restraining themselves. Thank you to my tireless moderators for knocking those nonsense comments out when they're not warranted, because we're not talking about anything else except for how we feel about our religion and our temple, et cetera, in our land that we've been pining for thousands of years, for almost 2,000 years. And I hope I left you with something that you can think about. I hope you gained from listening, or at the very least, I hope I helped you kill time until the day was over. Thank you so much. No, I have no interest in converting Gentiles. No, Judaism in general, I think most scholars, Jewish scholars, do not feel like there's a need to convert Gentiles, because in our faith, a good person is a good person. That's all God wants, really, out of people. God gave a present to the Jews. The present was the Torah, and the Jews have to keep the Torah. The world at large don't have to survive by keeping the Torah. The world at large survives, but the Jews keeping the Torah. The world at large survives by being good people. Don't kill each other. Don't steal from each other. Don't commit idol worship. That's basically how we feel. So we feel like Gentiles, whatever rewards is going to be in the afterlife, it's easy, much easier for non-Jews, because all you got to do is just basically live a life as a moral, good person, where the Jews also have to shake things on the holiday, and they have to count they have to count the days from Passover to Pentecost, and they have to make sure that if the person's donkey falls down, you help pick it up. And don't wear any clothes that has wool linen woven into it, unless it's sickness. Go figure. Anyway, that's our Torah. So we follow it, and that's what makes us good. But the general speaking, so therefore there's no proselytizing. Jews don't proselytize, and it's not because Jews think we're better. Jews think we're chosen or better than everyone else. No, just the opposite. Jews feel like we know the truth, and therefore when you know the truth, you're happy to just pass along to your children. If you want to know the truth and you want to learn, go ahead and learn. It says in the Talmud, anyone who wants to come and learn, we teach, we learn. Hillel the elder did it many times. His colleague on the other side, Shammai, he also tried to convert people, although he did it with a little bit more of an in-depth process. So conversion has always sort of been part of our faith, but we don't go out to proselytize conversion. If you want to come and learn, and you're earnest about it, you're honest, and you want to learn, you could definitely come and learn. Otherwise, Jews are very happy just passing along their tradition, their knowledge, the Torah to their children, allow their children to grow up as following the Torah, following traditions, following what it means to be Jewish, to whatever, again, like we talked about before, extent that you feel like is right and proper for you. And on it goes throughout the generations, and that's how Judaism survives, not by trying to get any more additions there. So that's why I say I like to debate Messianic Jews, people who are actually ethnically Jewish, born Jewish, people who are actually Jewish. I try to debate them because I want to show them the light and show them how they should just practice Judaism the authentic way, the original way, the way Judaism should be practiced. And of course, people who are the Reform and conservative, I try to show the benefits of being Orthodox, show how good it is to be Orthodox, how it's not as hard as you think it is. It's much easier than you think it is. It's much more rewarding than you think it is. It's not going to put a damper on your life like you think it is, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not asking you to be Hasidic. I'm not asking you to live in an insular community. But I think those that aren't Orthodox, I think there's a lot in the Torah that is still beneficial for. So that's really my focus. Yes, as Bernie said, we have to also be good examples. So there are good Jews and there are bad Jews, but we do try. But it's hard to know, but we do try as a people to be good examples to the world. We live with this thing called Kiddush Hashem, to sanctify God's name. We live with it. We're brought up, even if you're not very religious, you're always, no matter what level Judaism really are, for the most part, even traditional Jews are brought up with this sanctifying God's name. You're a Jew. The world looks at you as a Jew. Stand proud. Make sure they look at you and they know, oh, Jews act this. This is the way a Jew acts. The way a Jew acts is good. When Jews go on a bus, and when a Jewish school or teenagers go on a bus and they come back from a long trip, and the bus driver says, "I never saw teenagers behave so nicely in my life. I've never saw them so polite and clean up after themselves." This is what we're talking about, sanctifying God's name, showing that yes, Jews go, and we can act in a way that's a paradigm. We don't always do it, and we fail a lot because we're humans. We fail a lot, but yes, it is on our minds to try to act in a way, to be a paradigm, to show this is what we do. This is, we keep the Torah, we follow our laws, we follow our traditions, and we try to keep our neighborhood. If you realize Jewish neighborhoods, it's unbelievable. I will say this: when I lived in Jerusalem, I lived in a very poor neighborhood because I was by yeshiva there, by the Mir Yeshiva in central Jerusalem, and it's very, very, very poor neighborhood over there. The people, they would invite us out to eat, and on Shabbos they would give us a piece of chicken, and they themselves eat vegetables because they only had one piece of chicken to offer. It was very poor. And yet, 2 o'clock in the morning, I don't know why it was 2 o'clock in the morning, they're out, but no matter late at night, little kids run around the streets by themselves. It was completely safe. No one worried whatsoever. There was crime. There was no crime whatsoever going on in those neighborhoods. It was amazing to see. The poorest of people, and there's no crime. You don't see graffiti on the walls. You don't see people being stuck up. You don't see muggings. You don't see beatings. You don't see gangs. You don't see any of that stuff. All these people just want to do is just live their life. Even if they're poor, they want to live their life. You go to poor neighborhoods elsewhere, whether it's Aborigines or whether it's inner cities. Did I say Aborigines? That's in Australia. I meant what am I talking about? In America, the poor neighborhoods in the Midwest, Aboriginals, not Aboriginal, anyway, whatever it is called. You go, there, all of a sudden, it's very different. You go to any poor neighborhood around the world, it's very different. Go to a Jewish neighborhood, even if it's very poor, it's always gentrified, it's always clean, there's no graffiti, you're not going to get mugged, you're not going to get shot, you're not going to get beat up over there. It's, let me tell you something. Ask anyone in the entire world, okay, whether you met a Jew or not met a Jew. If you're walking down the street late at night and you see anyone from around the world who's different than you walking the street, if anyone else around the world, who would you hope most that it is that you feel most safe with? It's going to be a Jew. If it's a Jew walking opposite you down the street late at night anywhere in the world, you know that you don't have to worry about that. I can't say that on any other race, religion, creed, part, whatever it is. So one thing is, Jews try to be a paradigm. We fail a lot, like I said, but we try. At least we try. All you do is try. We're human. That's all we can do is try. Thank you so much for listening. I am going to sign off. I do hope to catch you guys in other lives. I do hope to catch you guys at the debates and at the podcasts that will be coming up, and just generally around. And peace to everyone, blessings in everyone, and may we all just thrive and be peaceful and everything.